She had power, money, and a corner office with a view of the whole city. He had a daughter, a broken truck, and exactly $43 in his checking account. One signature. That's all it took. One cold signature on a termination slip, and Vanessa Whitmore believed she had simply removed a problem. She never imagined that the man she fired that morning, the quiet one who didn't argue, didn't beg, just nodded once and walked away, would be standing in the rain that same night, giving her his jacket while her expensive SUV sat dead on the highway. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. The snow had been falling over Burlington since before sunrise. By 7:15 in the morning, the city looked almost peaceful. Rooftops buried white, the Winooski River sluggish under a layer of gray ice, the kind of stillness that makes Vermont feel like a place that time hasn't quite caught up to yet. Inside the 14th floor of Whitmore Logistics headquarters, nothing was peaceful. Vanessa Whitmore stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office with a ceramic mug of black coffee going cold in her hand, watching the snow drift down over the parking lot below. She hadn't slept well. She rarely did anymore. The board meeting from the previous Thursday still sat like a stone behind her sternum. 3 senior investors had questioned her restructuring timeline, using words like aggressive and premature, and she had smiled through every single minute of it, while privately cataloging each face, each frown, each skeptical raised eyebrow. 30 years old, billionaire, CEO of a mid-sized logistics company that her father had built from a single warehouse in 1987 and left to her 6 years ago, when a stroke took him quietly in his sleep. And still. Men twice her age sat across conference tables and questioned whether she had the experience. She set the coffee mug down on her desk. The surface was spotless, black lacquer, no clutter, a single framed photo of her father turned slightly toward the wall, because some mornings she couldn't look at it. Her assistant, Maya, had already placed the morning reports in a neat stack to her left. She picked up the top folder. The name at the top read, Cole, Ethan J. Warehouse Supervisor, Section D. She opened it. 3 pages of attendance logs. 8 instances of late arrivals over the past 4 months, some by 15 minutes, a few by more. HR had flagged it twice. Her COO, Leonard Graves, had walked her through the pattern personally 2 weeks earlier, spreading printouts across her desk with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood she didn't have time for long explanations. It's a morale issue, Leonard had said. If we let supervisors operate outside the standard, the floor workers notice. And then you've got a culture problem. Vanessa had nodded. She knew he was right. You couldn't hold one standard for some and another for others. She'd built her reputation, and what little respect she'd carved out in that boardroom, by being consistent, precise. Fair in the way that a balance sheet is fair. Numbers don't care about feelings. She closed the folder and pressed the intercom button. Maya, tell HR to bring Ethan Cole up at 8 o'clock. 1. At 7:58 a.m. Ethan Cole was still on the highway. He'd left the elementary school 7 minutes ago, 7 minutes later than he'd planned. But he hadn't been able to leave any sooner. Chloe had needed him to stay. It hadn't been a tantrum. That would have been easier, in a strange way. Tantrums he understood. He could talk his daughter down from a tantrum. But this morning, Chloe had just gripped his hand at the breakfast table in the school cafeteria, both small fingers wrapped around his, and refused to let go with the quiet, desperate determination of a child who had learned that sometimes people left and didn't come back. 5 more minutes, Daddy. He'd stayed 10. He sat with her over scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard and lukewarm orange juice in a small wax carton, and she'd talked to him about a book she was reading and a girl in her class named Sophia who had a dog named Pretzel, and Ethan had listened with his whole body, the way you do when you know the minutes are running out and your kid needs to feel like they're the only thing in the world right now. She was 8 years old. She'd lost her mother at 5. She'd spent the last 3 years being passed between school and the warehouse childcare arrangement, and evenings where her father came home exhausted but always sat on the floor with her and did homework and watched cartoons and read the same 3 chapters of the same chapter book until she fell asleep. Chloe was not a difficult child. She was a child who had learned that love was something you held on to with both hands. Ethan had kissed the top of her head, told her he'd pick her up at 3:30, and driven to work with the heat in his pickup truck struggling against the cold and the radio playing a country station he didn't particularly like, but never changed because Chloe had set the preset. He made it to the building at 8:09. The elevator up to the 14th floor took 3 minutes. Ethan had been inside Vanessa Whitmore's office exactly once before, 6 months ago, when he'd been asked to present a proposal about reorganizing the Section D inventory system. He'd stood at the back of the room while Leonard Graves presented the slides, and Vanessa had barely looked up from her notes. The proposal had been approved. Ethan had never been thanked for writing it. He knocked twice on the open door. Vanessa was already at her desk. She didn't stand. She gestured at the chair across from her with a small, economical motion, and Ethan sat. She looked younger in person than the profile photos the company circulated. Sharper, somehow, her dark hair pulled back tightly, reading glasses sitting on the desk beside the folder. Her blazer was charcoal gray, the kind of outfit that said this is a business conversation before a single word was spoken. Ethan straightened in the chair. He folded his hands on his knees. "Mr. Cole," Vanessa said, opening the folder without looking up. "I'm going to be direct with you. I don't think that serves either of us poorly." "I appreciate that," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, a little low. "You've been late 8 times in the last 4 months." She slid the attendance log across the desk toward him. He looked at it, but didn't pick it up. "We flagged this twice through HR. You were made aware of the standard expected of supervisors when you were promoted 18 months ago." "I was." "Can you offer an explanation?" There was a short pause. Not the nervous kind, the kind where someone is deciding how much of themselves to put in a room. "My daughter," he said. "She goes through rough patches. Some mornings are harder than others. I've tried to make up the time." "The logs show you make up the time," Vanessa said. "That's not the point. The point is the arrival time." She closed the folder. "I have floor supervisors who manage teams of 25 people. When those team members see their supervisor arriving late, it sets a precedent I can't afford." Ethan looked at her, not with anger, not with the particular wounded look that people got when they were building a case. He just looked at her, and she had the faint, irritating sensation of being examined. Not the way she examined people, reading for weakness or leverage, but something quieter. Like he was trying to decide if she meant what she said. "I understand," he said finally. Vanessa picked up the termination paperwork. She slid it across the desk. "We're letting you go effective today. You'll receive 2 weeks severance and a reference letter covering your technical performance. HR will walk you through the details." She expected pushback. She usually got some raised voices, negotiations, sometimes tears. Ethan Cole looked at the paperwork. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked back up at Vanessa with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not resignation, not defeat. Something older than both of those things. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. He stood, buttoned his coat, picked up nothing from the desk because there was nothing on the desk that belonged to him. "Thank you for your time," he said, and he walked out. Vanessa stared at this closed door for a moment. Then she turned back to her desk and picked up the next folder in the stack. She had a 9 o'clock call with a freight carrier out of Montreal. She had a lunch meeting with a pension fund representative. She had 437 unread emails and a board presentation to finalize by Thursday. She did not think about Ethan Cole again until much later that night, standing on the side of a highway in the dark, watching headlights pass her without slowing down. The warehouse floor on the east side of Whitmore Logistics was a different country from the 14th floor. Down there, it smelled like diesel and cardboard and the particular cold that gets into concrete floors and never really leaves. The ceiling was high enough that the fluorescent lights seemed to hang at a distance, casting a flat yellow light over rows of shelving units that went back 40 yards in either direction. Ethan came back down from the executive floor at 8:40. A few of the guys on Section D noticed immediately. You couldn't miss it, the way he walked back through the loading dock doors with the particular stillness of a man who was trying very hard to carry something without letting anyone see the weight of it. Marcus Webb was the first to say something. Big guy, 42, 20 years in warehouse work, the kind of man who had seen enough corporate decisions to recognize one on someone's face. "Hey." Marcus fell into step beside him. "You good?" "Yeah." Ethan kept walking toward his locker. "HR call you up?" "Yep." Marcus let that sit for a second. "How bad?" Ethan stopped at his locker. He turned the combination left, right, left, and opened it. Inside were a spare pair of work gloves, a water bottle with a crack in the lid held together with electrical tape, and a drawing Chloe had made of the two of them standing in front of their apartment building. She'd given him oversized hands, which she did every time she drew him. She'd told him once that it was because his hands were good for holding things. "They let me go," he said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Attendance?" "Yep." "Ethan." "Man." Marcus lowered his voice, though there was no one close enough to hear. "You want me to talk to someone? Because I know for a fact that Jenkins comes in late twice a week." "Don't." Ethan said it gently but firmly. "Don't make a thing out of it. It's done." "It's not right." "A lot of things aren't right." He peeled off his work gloves, set them on the shelf, and closed the locker. He picked up the drawing of himself and Chloe, folded it carefully along a crease that had been folded before, and slid it into his jacket pocket. "You're a good worker, Marcus. Just keep your head down and do the job." "You're telling me to keep my head down right now?" "I'm telling you I've got a daughter to think about." He picked up his bag. "That's all I'm ever doing." He shook Marcus's hand, nodded at two of the other guys who had drifted nearby, walked toward the exit with the same unhurried gait, coat buttoned, chin level. He didn't look back at the building. Pochang. He called his sister from the truck. Paula lived in Montpellier, 45 minutes away, and she answered on the second ring because she always answered quickly when it was Ethan. He was the younger sibling, and she had spent 20 years treating him like one, with a mixture of fierce protectiveness and unsolicited life advice that he mostly ignored but occasionally found himself following anyway. "Hey," he said. "Hey yourself. Why are you calling at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday? Got fired." Silence. Then, "Okay, tell me." He drove and talked. He didn't dramatize it. He rarely did. He laid it out factually. The attendance records, the meeting, Vanessa Whitmore's flat, efficient delivery of the news, the way she'd looked at him, not quite like a person, but like a line item in a column that needed balancing. Paula listened without interrupting, which for her was an act of extraordinary discipline. "Say something," he said, when he'd finished. "I'm thinking." "Paula." "I hate her," she said. "I just want to be clear about that on the record. She runs a company. She made a decision based on what she knew." "Ethan, she fired you on the morning of Chloe's school breakfast thing." "She didn't know that." "She should have asked." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the snow was still coming down, lighter now, but steady. He drove carefully. The roads were slick, and his truck's tires were 3 seasons past, needing replacement. "I'm not going to be angry about it," he said. "Of course you're not, because you're a relentlessly decent human being and it's exhausting to watch. He exhaled. "I've got to figure out what to tell Chloe." That quieted Paula down, because that was the real thing, the thing underneath everything else. Not the money. Though the money was serious, his savings were not deep, and the severance wouldn't last long. But the 8-year-old girl who was going to come running out of her school at 3:30, expecting him to take her to the library the way they always did on Wednesdays. "Don't tell her today," Paula said. "Give yourself a day or two. Figure out the plan first." "I don't like lying to her." "It's not lying, it's timing. There's a difference." He drove. "Come stay here for a few days," Paula said. "Both of you." "We're fine." "I know you're fine. That's not what I said. I said come stay." He almost smiled, almost. "I'll think about it." "You'll do nothing of the sort. You'll sit in that apartment and apply for jobs and eat cereal for dinner because you forgot to go to the grocery store." "Granola bars," he said. "Not cereal. I have standards." A short silence. Then Paula made a sound that was caught between a laugh and something more fragile. "You're going to be okay," she said. "You know that, right?" "Yeah." He believed it mostly. He had learned to mostly believe it. "I know." Ethan sat at the kitchen table at noon with his laptop open, a legal pad beside it, and a cup of instant coffee. The cheap kind, the kind you made when you were counting cans and jars in the pantry and doing the quiet math of survival. He'd already logged into the job site he'd used 2 years ago when he was transitioning out of the army. He had his resume pulled up in another tab. The resume was good. He knew that at least. Military logistics officer, 8 years of service, managed operations across 3 overseas deployments, supervised teams under pressure, no disciplinary issues in his entire career. He'd translated it into civilian terms carefully, the way the VA counselor had taught him. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, Chloe's room, which she'd decorated herself with fairy lights, and a hand-painted sign that said Chloe's Kingdom, and his room, which had a bed and a dresser and a framed photo of Rebecca on the nightstand that he still talked to sometimes when things were bad, when the 3 a.m. quiet got too big. Rebecca had been gone 3 years. Breast cancer. Diagnosed when Chloe was 2, managed for a while, and then not managed. She died in March, which had been cruel timing, because March in Vermont meant the ice was breaking up on the river, and the first green was starting to push through, and Ethan had always associated spring with hope, in a way that the past 3 years had been slowly and patiently dismantling. He ran the numbers. Checking account, $214 before the severance hit. Severance, 2 weeks. Approximately $1,900 after taxes. Rent, due in 11 days, $940. Car insurance, $117, due in 3 weeks. Chloe's after-school program, $320 a month. Groceries, minimum, $250. His laptop cursor hovered over a listing for a logistics coordinator position at a small shipping company in South Burlington. The pay was lower than what he'd been making at Whitmore, but the hours were regular and the commute was manageable. He started drafting the cover letter. I was on the 3rd paragraph when his phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Man, word's spreading on the floor. People are pissed. Half the dock guys want to walk out. He texted back, Don't, I mean it, not worth it. You sure? Positive. Eyes on your own situation. He set the phone down and went back to the cover letter. Outside, the snow kept falling. By 3 o'clock, he had applied to 4 positions. He made himself a sandwich with the last of the deli turkey, ate it standing over the kitchen sink because eating at the table alone felt different from eating at the table with Chloe, and then he got in the truck and drove to pick her up. She came through the school doors in a blue puffy coat he'd bought 2 sizes up so it would last through next winter, her backpack bouncing, and she spotted him in the pickup line and waved with both arms the way she always did, full body, like she was flagging down a plane. He got out to help her with her backpack. She hugged him around the waist hard enough that he felt it in his ribs. The library? She asked, already pulling toward the truck. The library, he confirmed. She talked the whole way there. Sophia's dog Pretzel had apparently eaten someone's homework, which she found enormously funny. And there was a new book in the Treehouse series she wanted, and could they stop for hot chocolate on the way home? We'll see, he said, because that was what he always said. And then he always stopped, because he couldn't say no to hot chocolate. He knew that about himself. At the library, she disappeared into the children's section with the confidence of a person who knew exactly where everything was. Ethan sat in one of the armchairs near the window with his phone and kept an eye on the job listings while she read on the floor between the shelves, with her coat still on and her boots leaving small wet prints on the carpet. He did not tell her about the job. Not yet. He watched her flip pages with her finger and mouthed the words slightly as she read, a habit she'd had since she first learned to read and had never grown out of. And he thought about the drawing in his jacket pocket, the one where she'd given him big hands. And he thought about Rebecca, who had also given him big hands in the sketches she used to make in the margins of her notebooks. He had a type, apparently. People who thought he could hold things. By 7 that evening, the weather had gotten worse. The snow that had been gentle through the day had picked up speed and malice with the dark. The meteorologists were calling it a significant winter storm system, the kind that buried road signs and turned highway on-ramps into skating rinks and generally reminded Vermont residents that, however many of these they'd lived through, nature did not become less serious on repeat viewings. Vanessa Whitmore was driving back from a dinner meeting in Stowe. She'd taken her company SUV, a black Cadillac Escalade, barely a year old, with heated seats and a premium sound system and all-weather tires that were, she would later tell the insurance company with some bitterness, apparently not quite all-weather enough. The meeting had run long. James Harrington, one of the senior partners from the pension fund, had lingered over dessert and port, telling stories about deals from the 90s with the nostalgic energy of a man who'd been very important and wanted you to know it. Vanessa had listened and laughed at the appropriate moments and mentally calculated whether his fund's second quarter commitment was worth the 65 additional minutes of table time. She'd decided it was. Barely. Now she was on Route 2, 40 minutes south of Burlington, and the Escalade was doing something deeply wrong. It had started as a vibration, subtle, like a bad road surface, then a pulling to the right. Then the dashboard lit up with the particular enthusiasm of electronics delivering terrible news. Tire pressure warning, then the steering response going soft and uncooperative, and then the rear end stepping out on a gentle curve and Vanessa's hands tightening on the wheel and her voice saying something very specific and unprintable into the empty car. She managed to get it to the shoulder, barely. She sat for a moment with the hazards blinking and the snow coming down hard and horizontal now, driven by a wind that had opinions, and she did a quick, cold inventory of her situation. Blowout on the rear right, possibly the left as well, from the feel of it, middle of nowhere, temperature outside reading 11 degrees, and her phone, she picked it up, showing a single flickering bar of service. She called roadside assistance. The hold music was cheerful in a way that felt personally insulting. After 6 minutes, a recorded voice informed her that wait times were currently over 90 minutes due to high call volume related to winter storm conditions. It suggested she stay in her vehicle and keep her hazard lights on. She stayed in her vehicle for about 3 minutes, then she got out. She stood at the rear of the Escalade in her dress coat, cashmere, beautiful, designed for boardrooms, and not for 11 degrees on a highway shoulder, and looked at the tire, which was definitively, unambiguously, completely flat. The left rear looked compromised too. The wind was doing something to her hair that no amount of money could immediately fix. She tried to wave down passing cars. Not many passed. The ones that did, she could see their headlights swinging wide to give her berth, did not slow down. It was dark, it was snowing, it was a highway, and she was a stranger. She understood the math. She didn't like it. After about 15 minutes, she'd made a list of the things she wished she had with her. Better coat, gloves, the roadside kit she'd been meaning to put in the Escalade for 4 months, and perhaps more meaningfully, a different set of choices going back about 20 years so that she wouldn't be standing on the side of this particular highway on this particular night in this particular life. She was considering going back to sit in the car when a pair of headlights slowed. Not a sleek car. Something old. She could tell by the sound of the engine, the particular grumble of a truck that had been maintained carefully but had some miles on it. An old Ford pickup, the kind of dark blue that fades in the sun over several decades to something closer to gray. It pulled to a stop about 20 feet ahead of her. The driver's door opened. A man got out. I was tall, wearing a dark work coat, and he walked toward her through the snow with the unhurried, deliberate gait of someone who had decided he was going to be useful and was now simply executing that decision. The headlights were behind him, and it wasn't until he was about 10 feet away that she saw his face. She had spent that morning firing him. The name came back to her immediately. Cole, Ethan J. He stopped. He looked at her, and she saw, in the second before either of them said anything, that he recognized her too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The snow moved sideways between them. The hazard lights blinked orange. Down in the truck cab, just visible through the windshield, a small shape shifted in the back seat. "Miss Whitmore," he said. His voice was level. No edge to it, no satisfaction, no anger, nothing that she deserved and half expected. "Mr. Cole." She heard how strange it sounded, how absurdly formal and insufficient it was. Your tire, I see it." He walked past her to look at the rear of the Escalade, crouching down in the snow to check the rim. He checked the left rear too, running his hand along the sidewall. Both rear tires. Right one's gone completely, left one's losing air fast. He stood. "You call roadside?" 90-minute wait. He nodded like this was unsurprising. He looked at the storm for a second with a kind of calm calculation that she recognized from the military veterans she'd occasionally met. The ability to look at a bad situation without adding panic to it. "You can't wait in the car that long," he said. "Temperature's dropping, and these storms don't move fast." He turned to look at her dress coat. "Is that all you have?" She straightened slightly. "Yes?" He unzipped his work coat. "No," she said immediately. "You don't. I'm not going to—" "You're standing in 11-degree weather in a cashmere blazer." He held the coat out. Not pushing it, just holding it there. "Take it." She took it. She told herself it was purely practical. It was. The coat was warm in the way that real warmth was. Body warmth. Worked in, the opposite of the performative luxury of her cashmere. She pulled it around herself and felt immediately, helplessly, better. "I'm going to see if I can get your spare on," he said. "You have a spare?" "I have no idea." "Okay." He was already moving to the back of the Escalade. He found the spare, mounted underneath the cargo floor, and the jack, and the lug wrench, and he laid them out in the snow with methodical efficiency. He He worked without commentary, occasionally asking her to hold the flashlight from his truck at specific angles. She held it, standing close enough to see what he was doing, which was more than she usually involved herself in physical processes of any kind, but which felt, in this context, like the minimum she could contribute. It took him 20 minutes in the wind and the snow. She watched him work and felt something uncomfortable that she could not immediately label. She was good at labeling things, people, problems, situations. She had built her professional life on the rapid, accurate assessment of information. But this was harder to categorize. The sight of a man she had fired that morning, kneeling in the snow in 11-degree weather, changing her tire without complaint or explanation. "You don't have to do this," she said. She meant it as something, an acknowledgement, maybe, not a dismissal. "I know," he said, not looking up from the lug nut. "I mean," she stopped. "After this morning, you're not—" She stopped again. He paused his work. He looked up at her. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I'm not leaving a person on the side of the highway in a snowstorm." She didn't have a response to that. He went back to the tire. When the spare was on, not safely drivable at highway speed, he told her, and the left tire was borderline. He called roadside assistance back on her behalf and navigated the automated system with what she could only describe as professional patience, ultimately reaching a human operator and arranging for the Escalade to be picked up and the tires replaced at a shop in Burlington. "You'll need a ride," he said, hanging up. "I can call a car service. In this weather, at this hour, out here?" He picked up his tools. "You'll wait an hour minimum." She looked at him. He looked at her. "I'm going to Burlington," he said. "I can take you. You can get a cab from there if you want." He paused. "My daughter's in the back seat. She fell asleep." Vanessa looked at the truck, at the small shape just visible through the window, bundled in a blanket. "How old?" she heard herself ask. 8, she nodded. She handed him back his coat. He put it on. She followed him to the truck, and he opened the passenger door for her with the same matter-of-fact manner he'd done everything else. Like this was just a thing that you did. You opened doors for people. She climbed in. The cab was warm and smelled like pine from one of those tree-shaped air fresheners hanging from the rear-view mirror, and the radio was playing a country station at low volume. She looked into the back seat. The little girl was curled on her side, a plaid blanket pulled up to her chin, one arm wrapped around a stuffed animal that had been repaired at the ear with a different colored thread. Careful, deliberate stitching, the kind you did when the thing mattered too much to throw away. Her face in sleep was extraordinarily peaceful. Vanessa turned back forward. Ethan got in, checked the mirrors, pulled back onto the highway. They drove. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Outside, the snow moved in the headlights. The road was empty. The country station played. "Her name is Chloe," he said after a while. "She's beautiful." Vanessa said it before she thought about whether to say it. "Yeah." His voice was quiet. "She is." More silence. The wipers moved steadily. "This morning," Vanessa started. "You don't have to," he said. "I want to." He glanced at her briefly, looked back at the road. "I had the attendance logs," she said. "They showed a pattern. My COO walked me through it. I had a board watching my management decisions, and a company culture I was trying to—" She stopped. None of it sounded right. It all sounded like exactly what it was. Reasons. Not wrong, exactly, but insufficient. "I didn't ask you why." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "You didn't." "Why didn't you tell me?" He thought about that. She could see him thinking about it. Not performing consideration, actually thinking. "Because I've been in situations before where explaining yourself to someone who's already made a decision just becomes—" He searched for the word. "Begging. And I don't do that." She turned to look at him, the side of his face in the dim light from the dashboard. He wasn't saying it with bitterness or pride. He said it like someone describing a principle they'd arrived at through a long process of testing. "That's fair," she said. "It's not a criticism of you." "It should be." He didn't answer that. The truck moved through the snow. In the back seat, Chloe shifted slightly and murmured something and was still again. "She's been through a lot," Vanessa said, almost without meaning to. "Yeah." A pause. "Her mom died 3 years ago." The words landed quietly in the warm cab. Vanessa absorbed them. "I'm sorry," she said. "Thank you." He said it without deflection, without the automatic minimizing she usually heard from people who had been through hard things and didn't want to burden you with the fact of it. He just said it. She looked out the window. The highway opened ahead of them. The storm was still coming, but the road felt manageable. She didn't know if that was the truck or the driver or just the peculiar quality of moving through difficult weather toward somewhere warm, but the fear she'd felt standing on the shoulder, the cold helplessness of it, had receded. She was being driven home by a man she had fired this morning. He was wearing his work coat, and his truck was 11 years old, and his daughter was asleep in the back seat. She did not know what to do with that. She realized with a start that felt physical, know the last time she had truly not known what to do with something. Well, he pulled off the highway at the Burlington exit and followed her directions to her building, the kind of building with a doorman and a lobby fountain and underground parking for residents. He stopped at the curb. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that." "You're welcome." He said it simply. She had her hand on the door handle. She stopped. "Mr. Cole." "Ethan," he said. She looked at him. "Ethan," she repeated. "Is there anything I can—" "No," he said. "You don't owe me anything. Not hard, not cold, just clear. Get inside, it's warm in there." She got out. She stood on the sidewalk and watched the old Ford pickup pull back into traffic, its taillights receding in the snow. The country station was probably still playing. The little girl was probably still asleep. The doorman held the lobby door for her. "Rough night, Miss Whitmore?" "Yes," she said. She walked inside. She stood in the warm lobby with its fountain and its marble floors, and the very pleasant smell of whatever candle the management had chosen for the month. And she thought about a drawing on a refrigerator door. She hadn't seen it yet. That would come later. But she thought about the stuffed animal with the different colored thread at the ear. She thought about 8-year-old Chloe gripping her father's hand that morning, not wanting to let go. She thought about the man who had given her his coat in 11-degree weather, changed her tire in the snow, and driven her home, and who had not once made her feel the weight of what she had done to him, which somehow made the weight of it heavier. She pressed the button for the 14th floor. The elevator rose. Vanessa Whitmore stared at her reflection in the polished bronze doors and thought, for the first time in what felt like years, that she was not entirely certain she recognized the person looking back at her. The morning after the storm, Vanessa woke up at 5:43. Not her alarm. Her alarm was set for 6:15. She woke up the way she sometimes did when something unresolved was running in the back of her mind like a program that hadn't finished. A low, persistent hum that made real sleep impossible past a certain hour. She lay in the dark of her bedroom and stared at the ceiling and thought about Ethan Cole. Not with guilt, exactly. She was practiced at not feeling guilt, or rather, at reframing decisions until guilt became something else, something more manageable, like necessary action or difficult but correct. She had learned that skill somewhere between inheriting a company at 24 and having to prove to a boardroom full of men in their 50s that she was not her father's placeholder. But the ceiling offered no reframing. The ceiling just gave it back to her straight. A man she had fired that morning had stood in 11-degree weather and changed her tire and driven her home without asking for anything, without making her feel it, without saying a single word designed to wound her when wounding her would have been the easiest and most human thing in the world to do. She got up. She made coffee, real coffee, the kind that required grinding and a specific ratio of water to grounds, because she had enough chaos in her professional life that she guarded the domestic rituals that still worked. She stood at the kitchen window with the mug in both hands and watched Burlington come gray and slow out of the overnight storm. The streets below had been plowed sometime in the early hours. The sky was the particular shade of white that meant it would snow again before noon. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She picked it up again and opened the company's internal HR portal with the particular focused energy of someone who has decided to know something and is no longer willing to wait for the information to come to them on its own schedule. She pulled up Ethan Cole's complete file. She read it from the beginning. The retirement of General Walter Harkin from active military service had not stopped him from having opinions, contacts, or an exceptionally good memory for names. I was 71 years old. The kind of lean that came from decades of physical discipline rather than diet, with a white crew cut and eyes that were still alert in the way that made young officers nervous when they were new. He served on the Whitmore Logistics Advisory Board in a capacity that was loosely described as strategic oversight, and more accurately described as Vanessa's father having trusted him implicitly, and Vanessa not yet having found a reason to change the arrangement. He called her at 8:15. She was already in her office when his name appeared on her screen. She answered on the first ring, which was not her habit. She usually let board members wait 2 rings, a small leverage point she'd learned from watching her father. "General Harkin," she said. "Vanessa." He never called her Ms. Whitmore. He'd known her since she was 12. "I heard something this morning that I want to ask you about directly." "Okay." "Did you let Ethan Cole go yesterday?" She paused for half a second. "Yes. Attendance issues." It was a documented, "I know Ethan Cole," Walter Harkin said. Something in his tone made her stop. "From what context?" she asked. She heard him exhale, not with frustration, but with the considered breath of a man who was deciding how to lay something out properly. "He served under a colonel I worked closely with overseas. Third deployment, logistics operations in a forward area that I'd rather not get into on this line. The short version is that there was a supply chain failure, such bad intelligence on a convoy route, compromised assets, the kind of situation where most officers cut their losses and protect the numbers." He paused. Cole didn't cut losses. He restructured the entire operation on the ground, in real time, with half the resources and twice the exposure, and he got his people out clean. All of them. Vanessa was quiet. "He also," Walter continued, "did all of that while his wife was in the final stages of treatment back home. He had a kid under 2 and a wife who was dying, and he did the job, the whole job." She had the phone pressed to her ear and her other hand flat on her desk, and she was looking at nothing. "Why didn't any of this appear in his file?" she said. "Because he didn't put it there. You know how some of these guys come out? The ones who actually did things tend to be quiet about it. The ones who are loud about their service are usually the ones who didn't do much worth talking about." A short pause. "Vanessa, I don't say this to undermine you, but I want you to look at those attendance records again." "I already am," she said. She was, in fact, already looking at something that had been bothering her since 5:43 that morning. The timestamps on the attendance corrections, the logged makeup time, had a formatting irregularity she hadn't caught the first time. A metadata pattern that was consistent in a way that felt less like a supervisor's records and more like someone had generated the late arrival data from a template and hadn't quite gotten the timestamp normalization right. She knew what that meant. She'd seen it before, in a different context, during an audit 2 years ago. It meant the records had been edited. "Thank you for calling me," she said. "Don't thank me. Fix it." She called her IT security director at 8:30 and her general counsel at 8:45, and by 9 o'clock she had put a quiet, internal hold on the attendance documentation from Section D going back 6 months. Not a formal investigation yet. She needed to be careful, needed to know what she was actually looking at before she started making accusations. But a hold, a preservation of the original file metadata so that nothing could be altered further before she understood the full shape of it. Then she sat back in her chair and thought about Leonard Graves. Leonard was 53. He had come to Whitmore Logistics 3 years ago, brought in by 2 of the senior board members as a recommendation, when Vanessa had needed a COO with freight industry experience. He was good at his job. She'd thought so from the first month, watching him reorganize the freight routing system with the kind of surgical efficiency she'd tried and failed to build into the previous structure. He had good instincts for operations. He dressed well. He laughed at the right moments and was quiet at the right moments, and had an instinct for institutional politics that she had occasionally found useful and occasionally found slightly cold. She had trusted him, not completely. She didn't trust anyone completely. That was a lesson her father's death and 2 years of solo leadership had pressed into her the hard way. But she had trusted his data. She picked up her pen and turned it end over end, a habit she'd had since law school. The restructuring contract. Leonard had been driving the restructuring process for the past 4 months, a significant operational overhaul of the company's freight management division, worth several $million in consulting and vendor agreements. He had presented her with multiple vendor assessments and recommended a short list of contractors. She hadn't had any reason to scrutinize his process. She was suddenly, unpleasantly regretting that. She went back to the metadata. The late arrival records for Ethan Cole had been modified. 14 separate entries spanning 4 months, each one showing a different timestamp for the original log entry and a separate timestamp for a modification. The modification timestamps were all from a period between 8 and 10 p.m. on weeknights. Someone working late, or someone who wanted it to look like legitimate after-hours record-keeping. The user ID attached to the modifications was a generic HR administrator account, but the access log showed it had been used from Leonard Graves's office IP address. Vanessa set the pen down. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she trusted inside these walls without reservation, her general counsel, a 58-year-old woman named Carol Deming, who had worked for her father for 20 years and had transferred that loyalty to Vanessa with the kind of steady, unsentimental dedication that Vanessa had come to depend on without ever quite saying so out loud. "Carol, I need you in my office at 10, and I need you to bring your forensic audit contact." A short pause. "How serious?" "I don't know yet. Serious enough that I want to know everything before anyone else does. I'll be there at 9:50. Meanwhile, Ethan was at his kitchen table. Chloe had gone to school without incident. He had gotten her up at 7, made oatmeal with brown sugar the way she liked it, braided her hair badly enough that she had sighed and fixed it herself in the bathroom mirror with the patient exasperation of a child who had accepted her father's limitations in this specific domain. He had driven her in, watched her walk through the school doors, and driven back to the apartment. He had applied to 2 more jobs from the table. He had eaten half a granola bar and forgotten about the other half. He had called Paula, who had immediately launched into a detailed practical plan involving his resume, 3 specific contacts she had in the Montpelier business community, and a logistics consulting firm she had read about, none of which he objected to because Paula's plans, while delivered with the force of a freight train, tended to be structurally sound. After he got off the phone with Paula, he sat for a while. The apartment was quiet in the middle of the day, in a way it never was at other hours. Not peaceful quiet, but aware quiet. The kind that made the refrigerator hum seem significant and the upstairs neighbor's footsteps something to track. I was not a man given to self-pity. He'd made a study of its opposite, the particular discipline of looking at what you had rather than what you'd lost, a practice that life had tested and refined and tested again over the past 3 years. Rebecca's death had not broken him. It had reshaped him, the way prolonged pressure reshapes material, not destroyed but permanently altered, with stress lines visible if you knew where to look. But he was $43 short of $257, and he had a daughter, and the job hunt that felt manageable in the abstract felt different. Sitting in the quiet kitchen at 11 in the morning on a Thursday, with the granola bar going stale on the counter, he opened his notebook, a plain brown composition book he used to track things, the kind of old-school record-keeping habit the Army had given him, and he'd never quit. He made a column of what he needed in the next 30 days. He made a column of what he had. He studied the gap between the 2 columns with the same dispassionate focus he applied to operational logistics problems, because that was what it was, a logistics problem, with variables and constraints and a window of time in which to solve it. It was solvable. He believed that. He had to believe that. He turned to a fresh page in the notebook and wrote at the top, in his careful block printing, for Chloe. Then he wrote down 3 things: her school program fees, her library membership renewal, and the fairy lights in her room that had started flickering and needed replacement. Small things. The small things that were not small. He would figure it out. He always had. What he didn't know, couldn't know, sitting in that quiet kitchen with his composition book and his $43, was that 40 minutes across town, in a glass office on the 14th floor of a building he'd worked in for 18 months, someone was beginning to understand what had actually been done to him. Carol Deming spread the forensic printouts across the conference table adjacent to Vanessa's office with the careful, methodical movements of a woman who had been through investigations before and knew that how you handled the paper trail mattered almost as much as what the paper trail said. She was a small woman, Carol, compact and sharp-featured, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck and a habit of going very quiet when she was processing something that worried her. She was very quiet now. Vanessa stood at the end of the table, arms crossed, watching. 14 modified entries, Carol said, without looking up. All from the same IP block, all time-stamped within a 90-minute window on 12 separate evenings. She turned a page. The original entries show Ethan Cole arriving within 2 to 4 minutes of his scheduled time on every single one of these dates. What do the modified entries show? 12 to 22 minutes late. Carol set the page down. It's not crude. Whoever did this understood how the attendance flags worked. They stayed just inside the range that would trigger an HR concern without crossing into the range that would require a formal written warning. Meaning they wanted documentation without escalation, Vanessa said. Meaning they wanted to build a case slowly. Something that looked like a pattern rather than a single incident. Something that a busy CEO reviewing a summary report would take at face value. Vanessa picked up the IP address log. Leonard Graves, she said. His office terminal. Yes. Carol finally looked up. There's more. She pushed another set of documents across the table. These were less straightforward: financial records, vendor agreements, internal contract memos. Vanessa pulled them closer and began to read. And as she read, the quiet in the room became a different kind of quiet. The kind that settles over a space when something large and ugly is being fully seen for the first time. Leonard Graves had a consulting arrangement with one of the firms shortlisted for the restructuring contract. Not in his name, in the name of a holding company registered in Delaware 18 months ago, with a nominee director and a business address that was a registered agent's office in Wilmington. The kind of structure that was not illegal in isolation. The kind of structure that became very illegal when the person setting it up was simultaneously evaluating vendors and recommending a winner to a company he worked for. The shortlisted firm, a freight management consultancy called Crestline Operational Solutions, was set to receive $4.2 million in contracts over the next 3 years if the restructuring went through as planned. Leonard Graves' holding company had a revenue-sharing agreement with Crestline. He built the vendor recommendation around his own interest, Vanessa said. She wasn't asking. She was simply saying it out loud because some things needed to be said out loud before they became fully real. That's what this looks like, Carol said. And Ethan Cole was apparently raising questions about the Section D operational changes. According to these internal memos, Carol pushed another page forward. Cole submitted 2 concerns to his direct supervisor about the restructuring timeline's impact on warehouse staffing. His supervisor forwarded them to Graves in September. Vanessa read the forwarded memo. It was detailed, specific, and entirely professional. The kind of operational concern that a good supervisor raised because it was his job to raise it, not because he was making trouble. Ethan had flagged that the proposed restructuring would create a 2-week gap in Section D coverage that would affect 3 major freight clients. He'd been right. She could see that clearly now. Graves received this in September, she said. Yes. And the attendance modification started in October. Carol's expression was the expression of a lawyer who has stopped being surprised by human behavior, but hasn't stopped finding it tiresome. Yes. Vanessa set the paper down. She stood at the window for a moment, looking out at Burlington's mid-morning gray, at the snow that was starting again the way it had been predicted to, coming down soft and steady and indifferent to the things happening in buildings below it. Leonard Graves had constructed a lie piece by piece over 4 months. He had done it with patience and precision. He had weaponized an attendance system against a man who was already carrying more weight than most people would have managed, and he had walked into her office and laid it on her desk and watched her act on it. And she had, without hesitation, without asking a single question. I want everything, she told Carol. Full documentation, chain of custody, everything preserved. I want it locked down before Leonard comes in this morning. Already in progress. Carol picked up her phone. And Carol. The lawyer looked up. I need Ethan Cole's home address from HR. Carol was quiet for a moment. Vanessa, you know that anything you say to him right now while the investigation is active needs to be... I'm not going as the CEO, Vanessa said. Not today. Carol studied her for a second with the particular penetrating attention she usually reserved for opposing counsel. Then she nodded. I'll get you the address. Leonard Graves arrived at the office at 9:47, which was his habit, late enough to have missed the morning operational briefings he considered beneath his level, early enough to maintain the appearance of engagement. He nodded at Maya on his way past. He got coffee from the executive break room. He sat down at his desk and opened his email with the practiced ease of a man who had no reason to believe that anything had changed overnight. He had, of course, heard about Vanessa's car situation. His assistant had mentioned it, with the vague concern that people performed when something happened to the boss. He had said the appropriate things, that sounds awful, glad she got home safely, and had privately filed it away under irrelevant. He was reading through his morning emails when he noticed, at 10:12, that his access to the HR attendance management system had been suspended. He frowned at the screen. He tried the freight management database. Also suspended. He tried two other internal systems. Same. He leaned back in his chair. His hands were very still on the armrests. He was smart. You didn't do what he had done without being smart, and part of being smart was being able to read a situation quickly and accurately. He read this one in approximately 90 seconds. He picked up his phone and called Vanessa. She didn't answer. He called her assistant. Ms. Whitmore is in a meeting, Maya said, in the specific tone she used when Ms. Whitmore was not actually in a meeting, but had asked not to be disturbed for certain callers. When is she available? I'll let her know you called. He put the phone down. He looked at the suspended system access notifications on his screen. He looked at his office door. He thought about the Delaware Holding Company and the revenue sharing agreement and the attendance logs he had been very careful about, or had believed he was very careful about. He thought about the metadata. He had not thought about the metadata. His hands, still on the armrests, were no longer entirely still. Vanessa stood outside Ethan's apartment building at 2 in the afternoon. She had driven herself, her personal car, a gray Audi that she kept in the private garage below her building, the one she used when she didn't want to be driven. She had the reinstatement contract in a manila folder on the passenger seat, though she hadn't decided exactly how to present it because she hadn't decided exactly what to say, which was an unusual condition for her to be in, and one she found uncomfortable in a way that was probably instructive. The building was 3 stories, brick, the kind of solid older construction that Vermont towns had a lot of. Not beautiful, exactly, but honest-looking, maintained by someone who cared enough to keep the front walk shoveled and the exterior paint from peeling too badly. There was a small sign by the door with apartment numbers. She found his buzzer. She pressed it. A pause. Then his voice through the intercom, slightly scratched by the speaker. Yeah, Mr. Cole, it's... She stopped. It's Vanessa Whitmore. A longer pause. Ethan, she said, there are things I need to tell you. I'm not here officially. She was not accustomed to standing outside buzzers and stumbling over sentences, and she was aware of how she must sound, and she was not sure it mattered. I need 5 minutes. Another pause. Then the door clicked. He opened the apartment door in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding a dish towel, which meant she had caught him in the middle of something ordinary and domestic. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her the night before. Not cold, not warm, just directly, like he was going to take the full measure of what was in front of him before deciding what to do with it. She had a manila folder under her arm, and her expensive coat was wet at the shoulders from the walk from the parking spot she'd found half a block away, and she was aware that she looked less like the CEO of a logistics company and more like a person who had not slept well and was in the middle of something difficult. Come in, he said, after a moment. The apartment was warm and smelled like whatever he'd been making. Something with onions, she thought, something that had been on a low heat for a while. She looked at the kitchen and then at the refrigerator, and the refrigerator was exactly what she'd somehow expected without knowing she expected it, covered in drawings, held up with small magnets shaped like various animals. The drawings done in crayon and marker, in the specific, confident imprecision of a child who drew constantly and cared more about expression than proportion. 3 figures, over and over. Tall, big-handed man, small girl with wild hair, a woman with long brown hair in many of the older drawings, less in the newer ones. Vanessa stood in the entrance hall and looked at the refrigerator and felt something in her chest adjust. You want coffee? Ethan asked from the kitchen. Yes, she said. Please. He filled a mug and handed it to her. Plain ceramic, slightly chipped at the handle. She took it with both hands. He leaned against the kitchen counter with his own mug and waited, without impatience, without performing patience. Just waited. Your attendance records were falsified, she said. He went very still. The late arrivals, all 14 of them, were added to your file after the fact, modified from a system terminal in my COO's office. She held his gaze. Leonard Graves manipulated your records. We believe it started after you submitted operational concerns that would have complicated a vendor contract he had a personal financial interest in. The dish towel was still in his hand. He set it down on the counter. He didn't say anything for a long moment. His expression was very controlled. Not blank, not performing calm, but the specific face of a person who is feeling something significant and is deciding what to do with it in real time. How sure are you? He said. The metadata is clear. Our forensic auditor confirmed it this morning. Carol Deming, my general counsel, has the full chain of documentation. She set her coffee down and opened the manila folder. This is a reinstatement offer. Same position, same pay, with back pay for the days since termination. We're also going to restructure the supervisor classification to reflect your operational contributions. That's a separate matter that should have been addressed before, and it wasn't. She set the folder on the counter beside him. And Leonard Graves will not be in that building when you come back. He looked at the folder. He looked at it for a long time. You didn't know, he said finally. Not a question, not absolution, just a statement of fact, the way he did everything. No. She picked up the coffee again because she needed something to do with her hands. But I didn't ask. I had a summary, and I acted on it, and I didn't ask you why. She paused. I should have. That's not a policy failure. That was me. Ethan was quiet. The soup or stew or whatever was on the stove made a small sound, a slow bubble. He went to it automatically and turned the heat down a notch, the way you do when something needs more time than you're currently giving it. Then he came back and stood by the counter and looked at the reinstatement folder again. Chloe doesn't know, he said, that I lost the job. I haven't told her yet. Okay, I was going to tell her this weekend. I was going to frame it as a transition, so it didn't scare her. He exhaled slowly. She worries about things, about people going away. Vanessa looked at the refrigerator, at the drawings, at the woman with the long brown hair, and the older ones, beginning to disappear from the newer ones. I understand, she said. He looked at her sharply, not unfriendly, just assessing. Do you? It was a fair challenge. She held it for a second. Not the way you do, she said. I haven't lost anyone the way you have. But I understand that a child who has been through what Chloe has been through needs consistency. Needs to feel like the structure around her isn't going to... She stopped. I fired her father, she said quietly. I know what that could have meant. He turned his coffee mug in his hands. Take the job back, she said. Not for me. Because you're good at it, and your section needs you, and because Leonard Graves doesn't get to be the reason your daughter finds out her world is less stable than she thought. A long silence. Then Ethan Cole picked up the folder. He opened it. He read it, properly, the way someone read a contract, not skimming but actually reading, each clause, each number. She watched him and did not rush him, which required more patience than she usually kept available. He closed the folder. I'll need to review a couple of the overtime clauses with someone before I sign, he said. Of course. And I want the operational concerns I raised in September formally addressed, not shelved. They will be. You were right about the coverage gap. He nodded slowly. Okay. He set the folder down. Thank you for coming. She put her coat back on. She picked up her bag. She was at the door when he said, Miss Whitmore. She turned. Last night, he paused. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just couldn't leave someone on the highway. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's the thing about it. He tilted his head slightly, questioning. If you'd been trying to make a point, she said, it would have been easier. She opened the door. The hallway outside the apartment smelled like old wood and someone's cooking 3 doors down. She walked to the stairs and took them down and pushed out into the cold afternoon air, and the snow was coming down again over Burlington, still the same flat white sky, still the same indifferent weather. She sat in the Audi for a moment before starting it. She thought about this folder on his counter. She thought about Chloe not knowing. She thought about the drawings on the refrigerator, the ones where the woman with brown hair was starting to disappear, because an 8-year-old had decided her father had carried enough sadness for one season. She started the car. She had a board meeting to prepare. She had Leonard Graves to deal with. She had a restructuring contract to pull apart and examine for every thread of corruption that had been woven into it. She had a lot of work to do, but she sat in the car for 1 more minute and did not move. And she let herself feel the full weight of what the last 36 hours had been. What she'd done. What she'd nearly destroyed. What had been handed back to her with more grace than it deserved. She let herself feel it properly, without reframing it into something more comfortable. It was not a pleasant feeling. She thought it was probably important that she not make it comfortable too quickly. Then she put the car in drive and pulled out into the snow. Back in the apartment, Ethan stood at his kitchen counter for a while after the sound of her footsteps faded in the stairwell. He looked at the folder. He looked at the stew on the stove, which needed another 20 minutes. He looked at the clock. 2:24, which meant he had just over an hour before he needed to leave to get Chloe. He opened the composition book on the table. The page still had the column of numbers. What he needed, what he had, the gap between them. He looked at it for a moment. Then he drew a careful line through the numbers. Not with relief, exactly. Not with the easy release of a problem solved. With something more complicated and quieter. The feeling of a man who had been through enough hard things to know that the reprieve was real, but that the hardness had also been real, and that both things were true simultaneously, and that you didn't dismiss one to embrace the other. He put the pen down and went to tend to the stew. The refrigerator drawings were at his back. All those crayon figures, the big-handed father, and the small girl, and the brown-haired woman, becoming less frequent in the newer ones. He knew they were there without looking at them. He always knew they were there. 22 minutes later, he locked the apartment and went to pick up his daughter. Ethan signed the reinstatement contract on a Friday morning in Carol Deming's office rather than Vanessa's, which had been Carol's suggestion and which Vanessa had agreed to without argument. Carol had explained it in practical terms. Cleaner documentation, clearer separation of the HR process from the ongoing internal investigation. But Vanessa understood the real reason. Ethan needed to come back on terms that felt like his own, not like something she was handing him from a position of power she'd already misused once. Carol understood people, which was one of the reasons Vanessa had kept her. She heard about the signing secondhand from Carol at 11:15. He was on time, Carol said, with a dryness that Vanessa chose not to examine too closely. When does he start back? Monday. He asked for the weekend. Vanessa nodded. She looked at the window. Burlington was doing its mid-November thing. The sky, the same unresolved gray it had been for a week. The streets below alternating between wet and frozen depending on the hour. And the operational concerns he raised, the September memo, already forwarded to the interim logistics director. Carol paused. Vanessa, he's good. You know that, right? I read through his service file. The full one, not the summary. The man has credentials that most of the people on your 14th floor would genuinely not be able to comprehend. I know. Just making sure. After Carol left, Vanessa sat at her desk and tried to work. She got through about 40 minutes of the vendor contract review before she stopped and stared at a paragraph about freight routing indemnification clauses without reading it. She was thinking about the apartment, the refrigerator, the small girl who had decided to stop drawing her mother so her father wouldn't be sad. She had been doing that, thinking about it, returning to it, more than she wanted to admit. It was not comfortable. She was not a woman who spent significant time in emotional territory. She couldn't map, and this was unmapped, and she didn't entirely know what to do with the terrain. She went back to the indemnification clauses. She read the same paragraph 4 times. She gave up and called her sister. Her sister, Dana, was 34 and lived in Portland, Maine, and had 2 kids and a husband who restored furniture, and a practical, affectionate impatience with Vanessa that Vanessa found both irritating and necessary. They talked twice a week, usually briefly, usually while one or both of them was doing something else. Dana answered with, "Did something happen, or is this a you need to talk but won't admit it call?" "Something happened," Vanessa said. "A few things happened." "Okay." She heard Dana close a door, the particular sound of stepping away from background noise to actually listen. "Tell me," Vanessa told her. The firing, the storm, the highway, Ethan in the rain, the falsified records, Leonard, the visit to the apartment. She kept it factual, which was her instinct, but Dana was good at hearing what was underneath the facts. When she finished, Dana was quiet for a moment. "The little girl," Dana said. "She's 8? "Yes. And her mom died when she was 5. "Yes. And this guy, Ethan, he drove you home in a snowstorm the same day you fired him?" "Yes." "Vanessa." "I know. I'm not saying anything. You're about to say something." "I'm saying," Dana said carefully, "that you've spent the last 6 years running a company with your head down, and I have not heard you talk about a person, any person, the way you just talked about those 2. And I want you to sit with that for a second before you turn it into a management decision." Vanessa turned the pen over in her hand. "I fixed what I broke. That's all this is." "You drove to his apartment personally. Carol could have done it. But you did it." Silence. "How's the stew, by the way?" Dana asked. "What?" You said it smelled like something was on the stove. I'm just asking. I didn't try the stew, Dana. Right, of course not. Very professional. A beat. Vanessa, just be a human being about it. That's all I'm saying. You're allowed to be affected by things. After she hung up, Vanessa sat with the pen in her hand and the freight contract on her desk and the gray Burlington sky outside her window. And she thought about being allowed to be affected by things. She thought about how long it had been since she had let herself be affected by something that wasn't a quarterly report or a board vote. She thought it had probably been longer than she should have let it go. The Leonard Graves situation developed with the brisk, ugly efficiency of a corporate crisis that had been well documented before anyone started asking questions. By Thursday of the following week, Carol's forensic auditor had compiled a report that was 112 pages long and covered, in methodical detail, the attendance log manipulations, the Delaware Holding Company, the revenue sharing agreement with Crestline Operational Solutions, and 3 additional vendor decisions over the past 18 months in which Leonard's recommendations had aligned, with remarkable consistency, with his financial interests. Leonard had hired an attorney by Wednesday morning, which told Vanessa everything she needed to know about whether he intended to cooperate. She had not spoken to him directly since the investigation began. She had relayed everything through Carol, which Leonard's attorney had objected to and which Carol had managed with the efficient precision of someone who had been managing corporate attorneys for 3 decades. The objections had stopped. What had not stopped was the particular cold anger that lived in Vanessa's chest when she thought about what Leonard had done. Not to her, though the professional betrayal was significant, but to Ethan. The deliberateness of it. The patience. 4 months of careful, incremental damage. Building a file against a man who had committed no greater offense than raising a legitimate concern and being a quiet, inconvenient presence. She had thought she was good at reading people. She had been looking at Leonard for 3 years and seeing someone useful. That was its own kind of humbling, and she was not entirely sure she'd finished being humbled by it yet. The board had been informed on Wednesday, in a closed session that had been tense and, in the case of the 2 members who had originally recommended Leonard, visibly uncomfortable. General Harkin had sat at the far end of the table and said nothing during the presentation and everything with his posture. When the vote on Leonard's termination came, it was unanimous. When the vote on referring the matter to the State Attorney General's office came, it was also unanimous, though with slightly less comfort on some faces. After the meeting, Walter Harkin had stopped beside Vanessa in the hallway. "You handled that well," he said. "I let it get there in the first place." "Yes," he said it without cushioning, "but you handled the correction well. There's a difference between the two, and people who are worth anything know the difference." She had nodded and walked back to her office and sat down and stared at the surface of her desk for a while. Ethan came back on Monday. Marcus Webb was the first person to see him walk through the loading dock doors, and Marcus's reaction was immediate and unguarded in the way that only genuine feeling is. He crossed the floor in 6 steps and grabbed Ethan's hand and then pulled him into a brief, backslapping embrace that Ethan accepted with the somewhat awkward grace of a man who was genuinely glad to be there, but had not entirely prepared himself for the reception. "Man," Marcus said, stepping back. "Man." "All right," Ethan said. "Don't make it weird." "I'm going to make it a little weird. They brought you back." "They brought me back." Word got out about what Graves did. The whole floor knows. Ethan set his bag down by his locker and turned the combination. "I figured. People are angry on your behalf, just so you know." "I know." He opened the locker. The spare gloves were still there. Apparently nobody had cleared it out, which meant someone on the floor had quietly made sure of that. He put his hand on the gloves for a second, not picking them up, just acknowledging them. "Tell them I appreciate it, and tell them it's done." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He looked at Marcus. "We've got a freight backlog from last week and a crew that needs direction. That's what we're doing today." Marcus shook his head, but he was smiling. "Same guy." "Same guy," Ethan said. He picked up the gloves and pulled them on. "Let's go." He did not go up to the 14th floor that day. He didn't need to. There was work to do, and he did it. Walked the floor, talked to his crew, reviewed the backlog with the same steady, organized attention he'd always brought to it. He ate lunch in the break room with Marcus and 2 of the younger dock workers, and listened to them argue about a football game with the comfortable disengagement of a man who didn't follow the team in question, but enjoyed the noise of people who did. I was in the middle of a freight reconciliation at 3:40 when his phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Vanessa. Wanted you to know the investigation is progressing. Nothing you need to do. Just, I wanted to tell you myself." He looked at it for a moment. He typed back, "Understood. Thank you." A pause. Then, "How's the first day?" He considered this. "Good. Busy. The way it should be." Another pause, longer. Then, "Good." He put the phone in his pocket and went back to the freight reconciliation. Well, it was Chloe who made the first move, though she didn't know that's what she was doing. It happened on the second Thursday after Ethan's return. Vanessa had come to Section D mid-afternoon on a floor walkthrough, something she'd started doing more often since the Leonard situation, partly because she was recalibrating her own relationship to the operational side of the company, and partly because she was not entirely willing to examine her reasons too closely. She had stopped to talk to Ethan about the Section D restructuring timeline, the legitimate version, the one that actually accounted for his September concerns. And they had been standing by the freight manifest board for about 10 minutes, talking through the staffing gap with the particular focused ease of two people who were better at problem-solving than at small talk, when Ethan's phone rang. He looked at it. "My daughter's school." "Go ahead," she said immediately. He stepped away and answered, and Vanessa turned back to the manifest board and pretended to be studying the freight columns, which she was not. She was listening to the half of the conversation she could hear. "I'll be right there." "No." "Don't worry about it. Tell her to wait in the office." "Yes." He hung up. "Chloe?" Vanessa asked, before she thought about whether to. "She had a fall on the playground. They think it's fine, but they want a parent to come." He was already picking up his jacket from the hook by his workstation. He looked at the manifest board with the expression of a man rapidly reassessing priorities. "I'll have Marcus cover the Go," Vanessa said. "It's fine. The timeline can wait an hour." He nodded. He had his jacket half on. Then he stopped with one arm in a sleeve and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you came down to Ethan." She held his gaze. "Your daughter fell down. Go." He finished putting the jacket on. He went. She spent another 5 minutes looking at the manifest board, actually looking at it this time because the work was real and the staffing gap was a genuine problem and she was genuinely trying to understand it better. Then she went back upstairs. At 6:15 her phone buzzed. It was Ethan's number. "She's okay." Scraped knee and a bruised ego. She was apparently trying to prove to a friend that she could jump from the second step of the climbing structure. Vanessa found herself smiling in the elevator. "Sounds like a future logistics director." A pause. Then, "She'd be better at it than most of the ones I've worked for." She laughed, which startled her slightly because it was real and unguarded, and her office was empty but still. "That's fair," she typed. "How's the manifest?" "Complicated. I have questions. I'll be in early tomorrow." She put the phone in her pocket and the elevator reached 14 and the doors opened and she walked to her office. And the thing Dana had said, "Just be a human being about it," was somewhere in the back of her mind doing what thoughts did when you were trying not to pay attention to them, which was refuse to go away. 3 weeks later on a Saturday, Vanessa made a mistake. Not a professional one. A personal one. The kind that reveals what you actually want when you were trying to be careful about it. She had driven to a farmer's market in the Old North End, which she did occasionally when she was making an effort to not spend entire weekends inside her apartment working. She had a canvas bag with 2 apples and a jar of local honey in it, and she was standing at a stall looking at preserves she didn't need when she heard a voice say, with great urgency, "He's going to get away." She turned. Chloe Cole was standing 3 feet away from her, pointing at a small dog on a leash that had wrapped itself around a stall pole and was now spinning in small agitated circles trying to free itself. The dog's owner, an elderly man, was having trouble reaching the leash clip because of the angle. "Here," Vanessa said automatically to the man. "I'll get it." She untangled the leash in about 15 seconds. The dog was enthusiastic about this process and licked her hand twice and handed it back to the owner, who thanked her with the particular warmth of someone who genuinely means it. She straightened up. Chloe was watching her with large, dark eyes that were almost exactly her father's. Same directness, same quality of attention that was disconcerting in a grown man and genuinely startling in an 8-year-old. "You're good at that," Chloe said. "It wasn't that complicated." "The dog liked you." "Dogs like everyone." "Not everyone," Chloe said, with the authority of a child who had given this serious thought. Sophia's dog Pretzel doesn't like my friend Jack at all. Jack says it's because dogs know things about people. That's a theory, Vanessa said. Chloe squinted at her. I've seen you before. Vanessa went still for half a second. You might have. I work with your dad. At the warehouse place. Yes. Chloe considered this. She was wearing a purple coat that was slightly too big for her, with the sleeves rolled up once, and her hair was in two braids that had started the morning well, and were now entering a state of comfortable entropy. She had a small bag over one shoulder with a library book visible at the top. You came to our apartment, Chloe said, a few weeks ago. I was at school, but Dad told me a lady from his work came. That's right. He said you fixed something that had been wrong. She said it with the careful precision of a child repeating something she'd been told and wanted to get right. About his job. I tried to. Chloe nodded slowly, processing. He also said you got stuck in the snow and he helped you. He did. He was very helpful. He's always like that, Chloe said, with a slight exasperation that was clearly affectionate rather than critical. He can't just leave things. He sees something that needs fixing, and he has to fix it. She paused. He fixed Mrs. Patterson's porch steps last spring without her even asking. She's our neighbor. She's old. That sounds like him, Vanessa said. Chloe squinted again. What's your name? Vanessa. I'm Chloe. I know. Something shifted in Chloe's expression. A quick, recalibrating assessment. Then, are you by yourself? Right now, yes. We're getting hot cider. She said it like it was a logical continuation of the previous thought, which apparently it was. Dad's over there. She pointed at a cider stall 20 feet away where Ethan was standing with his back to them, talking to the vendor. You could come. Vanessa opened her mouth to say something polite and deflecting, the kind of thing she said when she needed to exit a situation gracefully. Okay, she said instead. She wasn't entirely sure when she'd decided that turn. Ethan turned around from the cider stall with 2 cups and found his daughter standing with Vanessa Whitmore, both of them watching him with expressions that were different in character but equally unreadable. He stopped for a moment. He looked at Vanessa. She looked back at him with an expression that was genuinely slightly apologetic, which he hadn't seen on her face before, and which suited her in a way he didn't want to examine. She was helping a dog, Chloe said, as if this explained everything. Of course she was, Ethan said, after a moment. He bought a 3rd cup. They stood by the cider stall drinking hot apple cider while the farmer's market moved around them, and the conversation was the kind of conversation that happened in those situations. Disjointed and real, Chloe providing most of the subject matter, which ranged from Pretzel the dog to the library book in her bag, which was about deep-sea creatures and which she described in detail that was both scientifically specific and genuinely disturbing in certain passages. Vanessa listened with what Ethan could see was actual interest, not performed interest, asking questions about the anglerfish section that caused Chloe visible delight at being taken seriously. He watched this from slightly outside it and tried to work out what he was feeling. He was not a man who catastrophized. He was not a man who took simple moments and loaded them with meaning they hadn't yet earned. But he was also not a man who had spent 3 years practicing honesty with himself, only to stop when the honesty was inconvenient. So he looked at Vanessa crouching down slightly to be at Chloe's eye level, while Chloe explained the bioluminescence section, and he noted what he felt, and he didn't do anything with it, and he drank his cider. When they parted ways at the edge of the market, Vanessa heading back toward wherever she'd parked, Ethan and Chloe toward the truck. Chloe watched Vanessa walk away for a moment and then said, She's nice. She's got some things to work on, Ethan said honestly. Chloe considered this. But she's nice underneath. He looked down at his daughter. Yeah, he said. I think so. You should be friends with her. It's a little more complicated than that, kiddo. Why? Because she was my boss, and she fired me based on information someone manipulated because she trusted too much or looked too little, and because I helped her when I probably should have been angrier, and because something about that whole situation is unfinished in a way I can't entirely articulate. Grown-up stuff. Chloe accepted this with the resigned tolerance she applied to all explanations that began with grown-up stuff, which she clearly categorized as a category of things adults used to avoid answering properly. She fixed your braids, Ethan said, noticing. Chloe reached up to touch her hair. She asked if she could try. She said she used to do her sister's. He looked at the top of his daughter's head. The braids were genuinely better. Not perfect, but tighter, more even. The kind of better that came from someone who had actually done it before and remembered how. He didn't say anything. He took Chloe's hand and they walked to the truck. Vanessa sat in her car for a moment before starting it. The farmer's market noise was muffled through the windows, voices and movement, and the particular ambient warmth of a crowd on a cold day. She had a canvas bag with 2 apples and a jar of honey and an empty cider cup, and her fingers still smelled faintly like the dog she'd untangled. She thought about Chloe's braids. She hadn't planned that. Chloe had asked, with the directness that 8-year-olds operated with, whether Vanessa could fix them because they were coming loose, and Vanessa had said yes before consulting whatever part of her brain was supposed to manage appropriate professional boundaries, which apparently had the morning off. She had stood behind Chloe on a sidewalk at a farmer's market in Burlington, Vermont, and done the child's braids with hands that still remembered how, from 20 years of doing Dana's, and Chloe had stood very still and straight, the way children did when they were trying to be helpful by not moving, and the whole thing had taken maybe 4 minutes. 4 minutes. And yet she was sitting in a car thinking about it. She started the engine. She called Dana on the way home, hands-free, partly because Dana would want to know, and partly because saying it out loud to someone who would understand it felt necessary. "I ran into them," she said when Dana picked up. "At the farmer's market. The daughter found me and then we all had cider." A pause. "You had cider," Dana said. "Don't. I'm not doing anything. You had cider." With a child and her father, in a professional context. "Vanessa, you fixed her braids. You told me just now. That is not a professional context. That is a you like these people context." Vanessa drove. "He's an employee," she said. "He was an employee, then you fired him, then you unfired him. The timeline is pretty irregular at this point." Donna. "I'm just saying that the normal rules about employer-employee dynamics are already thoroughly disrupted here, and you standing on the professional boundary line at this point is a little bit like closing the barn door after. I get the metaphor." "Do you?" She did. She didn't say anything for a while. Burlington moved past her windows, familiar streets, winter-bare trees, the lake appearing briefly between buildings, flat and steel gray and enormous. "I don't know what to do with it," she said finally, which was the most honest version of what she was feeling. "You don't have to do anything with it," Dana said. "You just have to not be an idiot about it." "That's useful. I mean, be a person. Show up. Don't let it become another thing you manage instead of feel." A pause. "She sounds like a great kid." "She is." Vanessa said it without hesitation. She's something." "And him?" A longer pause. "He's the kind of person who makes you feel like you've been doing something wrong without ever saying so," Vanessa said. "And not in a cruel way, in a way that makes you want to actually fix the thing." Dana was quiet for a moment. "That's a good kind of person to have around. It's inconvenient. Most good things are." The formal visit happened the following Saturday. Vanessa had called ahead, texted actually, because calling felt like it put too much pressure on the moment, and Ethan had said sure, around 2 in the way he said most things, which was without excess of any kind. She brought the reinstatement documents for signature on a secondary matter Carol had flagged, which was real paperwork, and also, she could admit privately, a legitimate reason to show up that wasn't just, "I want to see how you are." She knocked. Ethan opened the door. He was in his weekend version, jeans, a worn Henley, work socks. He stepped back to let her in. Chloe appeared from the hallway about 15 seconds later. She had paint on her hands and on one side of her face, and was carrying a paintbrush with the unconcerned energy of someone who was in the middle of something important. "You came back," Chloe said. "I had some papers for your dad. Do you want to see my map?" "Chloe," Ethan said. "It's okay," Vanessa said. And then to Chloe, "What kind of map?" "Of the ocean. I'm painting all the zones. The sunlight zone is done, but the midnight zone is hard because it's supposed to be black, but then you can't see the fish." "Shh. You could use a very dark blue instead," Vanessa said, "and do the fish in a slightly lighter shade." Chloe stared at her. "Like bioluminescence." "Exactly like that." Chloe grabbed her hand and pulled her down the hallway. Ethan watched them go. He stood in the entrance of his apartment for a moment, the sounds of his daughter explaining deep sea zones to a woman he had, 3 weeks ago, been employed by, fired by, and driven through a snowstorm, a woman who was now being pulled by the hand toward a watercolor map of the ocean by a child who collected adults she deemed sufficiently interesting. He made coffee. He brought it to them in Chloe's room. Vanessa was sitting on the floor. He hadn't expected that, somehow. She was on the floor, cross-legged, shoes off, her coat over the back of Chloe's desk chair, and she was holding the paintbrush while Chloe directed her with the authority of an 8-year-old who has found someone capable of executing her vision. The map was spread on a large piece of cardboard on the floor, and it was genuinely impressive, detailed and careful, and covered in small handwritten labels that Chloe had clearly spent real time on. Vanessa was adding fish to the midnight zone. Small, careful fish in dark blue-gray with lighter markings that did, he had to admit, look like bioluminescence. "Here," he said, setting the coffee down beside her. She looked up. "Thank you." He sat on the edge of Chloe's bed and watched them work and drank his own coffee, and the afternoon was quiet except for Chloe's steady narration about ocean zones and the occasional question from Vanessa and the small sounds of a paintbrush on cardboard. Outside, the November light was going early the way it did this time of year, pressing the afternoon toward dark faster than it deserved. He thought about the composition book on the kitchen table, the crossed-out numbers. He thought about the tire iron in the snow and the cold and the way she'd taken his coat without the pride that would have made it complicated. He thought about the fact that she was sitting on his daughter's floor painting fish and had not, once since the moment she walked in, performed any version of herself that he could identify as performance. He thought that the version of Vanessa Whitmore sitting on the floor with paint on her fingers was one he suspected very few people in her professional life had ever seen. "Daddy," Chloe said, without looking up from the map, "can Vanessa stay for dinner?" The question landed in the room with the ease of a child who did not understand why it might be complicated, which was its own kind of clarity. Ethan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at him. Her expression had a quality he hadn't seen on her face in any of their professional interactions. Slightly uncertain, slightly open, waiting. "It's just pasta," he said. "Pasta is fine," she said. "We have garlic bread," Chloe offered, as if sealing a negotiation. "Then definitely yes," Vanessa said. Chloe looked satisfied in the way that children looked satisfied when the world arranged itself sensibly. She went back to the map. She pointed at a blank section near the bottom of the cardboard. "This is the Hadal zone," she told Vanessa. "It's the deepest part. Almost nothing lives there." "What does live there?" Vanessa asked. "Mostly snailfish, and some amphipods. They eat whatever falls down from above." She said this with a kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that was not sad, but was not sad. "They survive on what comes to them." Ethan looked at his daughter. Sometimes she said things that were just biology, and sometimes she said things that were just biology, and also something else entirely. And he never knew which one it was, and maybe she didn't either, and maybe that was fine. "That's actually kind of remarkable," Vanessa said softly. "Surviving that deep." Chloe agreed. She held her hand out for the paintbrush. "Can I do this part? I want to do the snailfish myself." Vanessa handed it over. The afternoon continued, and the pasta was made, Ethan's version, which involved more garlic than most recipes suggested, and a pan sauce that he made from what was in the refrigerator and was, he knew objectively, actually quite good. And the three of them ate at the small kitchen table with the refrigerator drawings at their backs, and the candlelight that was just the overhead bulb but was warm enough in the small space that it felt like something intentional. Vanessa ate with the focused appreciation of someone who cooked rarely enough that other people's food still surprised her. She finished everything on her plate and didn't make a thing of it, just cleared it naturally. Chloe talked about the snailfish for part of dinner and then about a project at school, and then fell briefly quiet in the way she did when she was getting tired, the slightly unfocused look, the slower sentences. Ethan got up to deal with the plates. Chloe looked at Vanessa across the table. She had the drowsy frankness of a child whose social filters were going offline for the evening. "Do you have kids?" Chloe asked. "No," Vanessa said. "Do you want some?" "Chloe," Ethan said from the kitchen. "It's okay," Vanessa said again. She looked at Chloe. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't figured that part out yet." Chloe considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "That's okay," she said finally. "Dad says some things you figure out while you're doing them." Ethan had stopped at the sink. Vanessa looked at the table surface for a moment. "Your dad's right," she said. "He usually is," Chloe said. "I don't always tell him that." "Smart strategy," Vanessa said. Chloe smiled, wide, sudden, the kind of smile that rearranged her whole face. It was her father's smile, Vanessa realized. The same shape, the same quality of arriving all at once. She hadn't seen it on Ethan often, but she'd seen it enough to know it. She helped carry dishes to the sink. She and Ethan stood at the counter for a moment while Chloe drifted toward the couch with her ocean book, the preliminary stage of winding down that preceded sleep by about 40 minutes. "She asked you," he said quietly. "She did. She doesn't usually ask strangers personal questions. I don't think she thinks I'm a stranger anymore." He looked at her. Close range now. The kitchen was small and they were both at the sink, and the distance was the kind that required acknowledgement. "No," he said. "I don't think she does." They stood there for a moment. From the couch, Chloe turned a page. "I should go," Vanessa said. "Probably," he said. Neither of them moved for another second. Then she stepped back and got her coat from the chair, and he walked her to the door, and Chloe called from the couch, "Bye, Vanessa?" Without looking up from the book, with the offhand intimacy of someone saying goodbye to a person they expected to see again. "Bye, Chloe," Vanessa said. She walked down the stairs and out into the cold November night, and she stood on the sidewalk outside the building for a moment with her coat pulled close, looking up at the yellow-lit windows of the second floor, and she thought about the midnight zone fish and the things that survived on what came down to them from above, and about the snailfish Chloe had insisted on painting herself. She thought about a little girl who had stopped drawing her mother's face to protect her father from sadness, and who had just told a near stranger that she didn't always tell her dad he was right, because that was smart strategy. She thought, "I have not been this present in years. Not in a meeting, not in a negotiation, not in any room where she was supposed to be at her best. Not since her father died, maybe. Not since the last time she'd sat in a room with someone who mattered enough to make the room feel small and real." The window above was warm and still. She walked to her car. The board meeting was scheduled for the second Monday of December at 9 in the morning in the large conference room on the 14th floor that looked out over Burlington's rooftops. Leonard Graves had been informed of the meeting through his attorney. The notice had been formal and brief. Standard language about a scheduled review of executive performance and conduct. And Leonard had read it and understood exactly what it was. He arrived at 9:02 with his attorney, a sharp-suited man named Richard Farwell, who had spent 20 years doing corporate defense work in Burlington and Boston, and who had the practiced, slightly theatrical calm of someone who was paid well to appear unworried. Vanessa watched them come through the conference room door from her seat at the head of the table. She had been there since 8:15. She had reviewed Carol's documentation one final time, not because she needed to, but because she was the kind of person who did not walk into important rooms underprepared, and also because she had not slept particularly well, and reviewing documentation gave her something to do with the particular restless energy that lived in her chest on mornings like this. The energy wasn't fear. She had been in difficult boardrooms before. It was something closer to the feeling before a reckoning, the knowledge that something large was about to become permanently true in a way it couldn't be walked back from. 7 board members were present. General Harkin sat at the far end, in the same chair he always took, with the same erect posture and still hands. The 2 members who had originally recommended Leonard, Preston Hale, and David Okafor, sat together on the left side of the table with expressions that were carefully managed but not entirely successful. Everyone else had the particular alertness of people who had read the preliminary briefing and understood what they were about to watch. Carol Deming sat to Vanessa's right, with the documentation in a neat stack in front of her. Leonard sat across from Vanessa, midway down the table. He was well-dressed, as always, charcoal suit, conservative tie, the whole presentation of a man who had spent decades understanding that appearance and authority were deeply connected. He looked directly at Vanessa when he sat down. His expression was controlled in a way that had cost him something to achieve, and she could see the cost in the slight tension at the corners of his eyes. Richard Farwell set a leather portfolio on the table and opened it. "Before we begin," Farwell said, in the measured tone of someone positioning for leverage, "I want to note for the record that my client disputes the characterization of events in the preliminary briefing and is prepared to provide substantial context that—" "Mr. Farwell," Vanessa said, "you'll have an opportunity to respond. We'll begin with the documentation." Carol nodded slightly and opened the first folder. What followed was 74 minutes of the most uncomfortable silence Vanessa had ever presided over, which was saying something given her career to date. Carol walked through the evidence methodically, without drama, which was the right approach. And also, Vanessa had noticed over the years the most devastating one. Drama gave people something to push against. Methodology just accumulated, piece by piece, until the weight of it was simply too much. The attendance log modifications first. The metadata, the IP address logs, the timestamps, the forensic auditor's analysis. Carol placed each document on the table and explained it in clear, precise sentences and answered questions from board members when they had them. And with each exchange, the room got quieter. In the way that rooms got quiet when people were absorbing something they didn't want to be true. Preston Hale asked 2 questions about the methodology of the forensic audit, both of which Carol answered completely. After the second answer, Hale went quiet and stayed quiet. Then the vendor contracts, the Delaware Holding Company, Crestline Operational Solutions, the revenue sharing agreement. Carol laid it out in the same level tone. Here is the document, here is what it means, here is how it connects to this decision, and this recommendation, and this contract value. Leonard said nothing. His attorney said nothing. General Harkin said nothing, but his eyes tracked every document with the attention of a man who was building a complete picture and ensuring that the picture was accurate before he did anything with it. At the 40-minute mark, Vanessa spoke for the first time since opening the meeting. Ethan Cole, she said, warehouse supervisor, Section D. 8 years of military service, decorated logistics officer. Came to Whitmore Logistics 18 months ago. Raised a legitimate operational concern in September regarding the restructuring timeline. His concern was forwarded to Mr. Graves. She looked at Leonard. His attendance records were subsequently modified to construct a pattern of tardiness that did not exist in the original data. I was terminated based on those modifications. She paused. He was terminated by me because I acted on information I was given without adequate verification. That is my failure, and I've addressed it. But the information itself, the manufactured evidence, that is Mr. Graves's. Leonard met her gaze. Something moved in his expression. Not remorse, she didn't think, but a kind of resignation that was colder than remorse. The resignation of a man who had known this was a possible outcome when he set things in motion and had calculated it acceptable, and was now finding the calculation had been wrong. I'd like to address the board, Leonard said. It was the first time he'd spoken. Richard Farwell touched his arm briefly, the gesture of a lawyer who has assessed the situation and believes his client should not speak. Leonard ignored it. I'd like to address the board, he said again, looking at Vanessa. She gestured to the table. Go ahead. Leonard set both hands flat on the conference table. He looked at the board members, one by one, with the deliberate eye contact of someone who had spent a career managing rooms. The restructuring contract represented the most significant operational opportunity this company has seen in a decade, he said. I identified that opportunity. I built the strategic framework for it. Crestline was the best vendor for the job. That's not compromised by my business relationship with them. It's validated by the analysis. He paused. And Ethan Cole was a problem. Not because of anything personal, because he was the kind of mid-level supervisor who raises process concerns as a way of protecting his turf against change. And if we'd let that pattern develop, it would have infected the restructuring at the operational level. The room was quiet. You falsified personnel records, Vanessa said. Her voice was even. I accelerated an outcome that was going to happen anyway. Based on what? Based on my assessment of the situation. Your assessment, she held his gaze. You assessed that a man who raised a legitimate operational concern, a concern that our subsequent review confirmed was accurate, deserved to lose his job. And instead of making that case through the appropriate channels, you manufactured evidence and let me act on it. You wanted results without complications, Leonard said. That's always been the directive. The coldness of it landed in the room like something dropped. General Harkin, at the far end of the table, made a sound that was not quite a word. David Okafor looked at the table surface. Preston Hale's expression had moved through several phases and arrived at something that looked like it wanted to be several things simultaneously. Mr. Graves, Vanessa said, and her voice was the flattest it had been all morning. I want results through accurate information and ethical process. That has always been the directive. If you interpreted it otherwise, that is a failure of judgment. I will add to the rest of them. She looked at Carol. The vote. Carol laid the termination resolution on the table. It was seconded before she finished placing it. The vote was 7-0. Leonard Graves stood. He buttoned his jacket, the automatic gesture of a man whose professional presentation was the last thing he still controlled in the room. Richard Farwell gathered his portfolio. Leonard looked at Vanessa one final time, and in that look she saw several things. Anger, yes, and calculation still, even now. And beneath those something that might have been a version of the shame that people felt when they had done something that couldn't be reframed into something else, no matter how hard they tried. She held the look without expression until he looked away. The door opened. Security. Two men who had been waiting outside, which had been Carol's arrangement, stepped in. Leonard walked out between them with his head level and his jacket straight, the last performance of a man who understood that how you left the room was part of the record. The door closed. The room exhaled. Preston Hale said, to no one in particular, I didn't know. His voice was quiet and not entirely steady. I know, Vanessa said. She did believe that. Hale had recommended Leonard in good faith and had spent the last 3 weeks sitting with the fact that his recommendation had led to this. That was its own consequence, and she didn't need to add to it. General Harkins stood and walked the length of the table toward her. He stopped beside her chair. He didn't say anything immediately. He had a way of delivering weight and silence that she'd noticed over the years. Your father would have handled it the same way, he said, finally. She looked at the table. He wouldn't have needed to handle it. He would have seen it coming. Maybe. Walter picked up his water glass and looked at it. He also missed things, Vanessa. He was human. So are you. He set the glass down. The question isn't whether you miss things. The question is what you do when you find out. She nodded. He walked to the door, paused, and turned back. Cole's good people. Treat him accordingly. I know he is, she said. The general nodded once and walked out. Ethan was in the middle of a freight audit when Marcus appeared at his elbow with an expression that was doing too many things at once. What? Ethan said. Graves is gone. Marcus said it low, watching his face. Security walked him out about an hour ago. Word just came down. Ethan looked at the freight manifest in his hands. He set it down on the pallet beside him with care, squaring the edges automatically, a habit. Okay, he said. Marcus stared at him. That's it? Okay. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something. The man tried to destroy your career. He failed, Ethan said, and now he's gone. He picked up the manifest again. I've got 12 pallets to reconcile before 2 o'clock. You're not even... Marcus stopped. He made a sound of frustrated admiration. I genuinely cannot tell if you're the most well-adjusted person I've ever met, or if there's something deeply wrong with you. Probably some of both, Ethan said. Marcus shook his head. He turned to go. Then, over his shoulder, for what it's worth, the floor guys, all of them. They know what happened and who handled it with class. That matters. Ethan looked at his crew, spread across Section D doing what they did every day. Moving freight, checking manifests, keeping the operation running. They knew. He could see it in the way they moved this morning, something slightly different in the energy, a collective quiet dignity that people had when they felt that something right had been done and they didn't need to make a production of it. Tell them I said thanks, he said. He went back to the freight audit. His phone buzzed at noon. A text from Vanessa. It's done. He's gone. You'll receive formal notification through HR today about the secondary compensation, back pay, and the reclassification. Carol will send the documents. He read it. Then he typed, Thank you for seeing it through. A pause. Then, you shouldn't have had to wait this long for anyone to see it at all. He thought about that for a moment. No, he typed. But here we are. Here we are, she typed back. He put the phone in his pocket and picked up his coffee from the top of the pallet. It had gone cold, which was its usual state by the time he got back to it, and drank it anyway, because cold coffee was still coffee, and he had 12 pallets to get through before 2 o'clock. 3 days later, the State Attorney General's office opened a formal inquiry into Leonard Graves. The news made the Burlington business community's weekly newsletter and was discussed briefly and uncomfortably in 2 of the professional circles Leonard had moved in, and then the world went on in the way it did. The next thing happening, and then the next thing after that. Vanessa gave a brief statement through Carol, confirming the company's full cooperation with the inquiry, inquiry and its commitment to ethical governance. She did not elaborate. She had learned over 6 years of running a company built on her father's reputation, that how you talked about other people's failures said as much about you as about them, and she had nothing she needed to prove by discussing Leonard Graves publicly. What she did instead was spend 3 days re-examining every major decision Leonard had touched over the past 3 years. It was tedious, uncomfortable work, the kind that required her to sit with the knowledge that she had been operating on compromised information for a long time without knowing it, which was a different kind of humbling than the Leonard situation itself. That had been a betrayal from outside. This was the aftermath of it, the slow work of figuring out what was real and what had been built on something false. Carol helped. The forensic auditor helped. 2 of the senior operational directors, people who had been there before Leonard arrived, and had watched his changes with varying degrees of private skepticism, turned out to have detailed opinions that they expressed with the particular relief of people who had been waiting to be asked. She had not asked them before. She noted that. She wrote it down in the margin of her legal pad, not as a self-criticism, but as information, the kind of information that was only useful if you did something different with it going forward. On the 4th day after the board meeting, she came down to Section D, not for a walkthrough, not with a specific operational purpose. She came down because she had been thinking about something Walter Harkin had said. Treat him accordingly. And because she'd been thinking about what that meant beyond the legal and financial corrections that Carol had already handled. Ethan was at the Freight Manifest board when she came in. He saw her and gave her the brief nod he gave her these days. Not deferential, not quite colleague level, something that occupied its own category that neither of them had named. He finished marking the manifest and walked over. Ms. Whitmore. Vanessa, she said. He paused. Vanessa. They walked to the quieter end of the floor, near the loading dock windows that looked out on the back lot where the freight trucks came in. The lot was empty at this hour, a wide gray expanse of cleared snow and concrete under a December sky. How are you doing with it? She asked. Honestly, he thought about it the way he thought about things. Not quickly, not performing consideration. It doesn't feel like a victory, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not glad he's gone in the way that he stopped. He did what he did because I was inconvenient to him. That's the actual scale of it. I wasn't a threat. I wasn't any kind of serious obstacle. I was just in the way. And he was willing to do all of that because of that. He looked at the back lot. That's a small story. And small stories are harder to carry than big ones, I think, because the stakes don't match the damage. Vanessa looked at the side of his face. The damage was real, she said. The damage was real, he agreed. I'm not saying it wasn't. The $43, she said. He looked at her. The night I came to the apartment, you had $43. You saw that. I saw the notebook. I wasn't trying to. I was quiet for a moment. The first 2 days after the firing, I was doing the math. How long we could manage. What we'd have to cut. He exhaled slowly. I never told Chloe. I never got to the point where I had to. But I sat at that kitchen table, and I ran the numbers, and I knew what the floor was, and I knew what happened if we went through it. I'm sorry, she said. For all of it. I know you are. He said it simply. You've said so. And you fixed what you could fix. I don't... He turned slightly toward her. I don't need you to keep apologizing, Vanessa. It doesn't help either of us. She absorbed that. He was right, and she knew it, and the fact that he said it directly, rather than letting her continue performing contrition, said something about him that she was still learning how to receive. What does help? She asked. I was quiet for a second. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his mouth moved. You painted pretty good fish, he said. She felt the laugh before she decided to have it, a short, unguarded sound. Chloe was very specific about what she wanted. She always is. He leaned his shoulder against the dock frame. She asked about you, after the Saturday at the apartment. What did she ask? When you were coming back. He said it neutrally, matter of fact, the way he delivered most things. But there was something underneath the neutrality that she had gotten better at reading over the past weeks, a kind of careful honesty that operated below the level of the words. What did you tell her? Vanessa asked. I told her I didn't know. She looked at him. That was the honest answer, he said. Is it still the honest answer? He looked at her for a moment with the direct, measuring look that she had first found uncomfortable and had since come to understand was simply how he engaged with things that mattered. He looked at them properly, without the social hedging that most people use to make difficult moments more manageable. "No," he said. "I don't think it is." The December light came through the loading dock windows and lay flat and pale on the concrete floor between them. Somewhere in the back of the warehouse, a forklift moved. The building hummed with its ordinary working sounds, the sounds of freight and logistics, and the ordinary machinery of commerce. And she was standing in the middle of it with a man she had fired and then seen clearly. And neither of them said anything else for a moment because some things were better given a little room before you talked around them. "I should let you get back to work," she said. "Yeah." He pushed off the dock frame. "Chloe's winter program is Friday, at the school." He paused, and the pause had a specific quality of someone who has decided to say something and is now in the process of saying it. She has 3 lines in the narration and she's been practicing them every day for 2 weeks. She'd probably... He stopped. "I mean, if you weren't doing anything." Vanessa looked at him. "I'm not doing anything Friday," she said. He nodded. 7 o'clock, Jefferson Elementary. "I'll be there." He walked back to the freight manifest board. She watched him go. The same unhurried walk, the same quality of purpose, the same man she'd watched leave her office 4 weeks ago, with a dignity she hadn't deserved to witness and had not been able to forget since. She took the elevator back up to 14. Maya had 4 things waiting for her attention. She handled all 4 in 30 minutes and then sat at her desk with the Burlington winter outside her window and thought about Friday. She thought about Chloe practicing 3 lines of narration every day for 2 weeks. She thought about what it meant that a child she'd known for less than a month wanted her in the audience. She thought about the fact that she wanted to be there, not as a gesture, not as a way of continuing to demonstrate accountability for what she'd done. She wanted to be there because she wanted to see Chloe deliver those 3 lines, and because she wanted to sit beside Ethan in a school auditorium on a December evening, and because those were honest things that she was done pretending were complicated. She picked up the phone and called Dana. Dana answered on the first ring. "What happened?" "Nothing happened. She stopped. "He invited me to Chloe's school thing on Friday." A pause. "He invited you," Dana said. "Yes. The man you fired. We've established that." "To his daughter's school program." 3 lines of narration. Dana made a sound. "Vanessa." "I know." "You like him." "I know that too." "Say it." "Dana, just say it, out loud. It won't kill you." Vanessa looked at the ceiling of her office, at the clean white expanse of it, the recessed lighting, the room she had worked in for 6 years in the building her father had built. She thought about the old Ford pickup in the snow. She thought about cold coffee on a pallet. She thought about a man who had called her by her first name like it was just her name, like she was just a person. "I like him," she said. "There it is," Dana said. "It's complicated." "It's really not at this point. He's a good person who makes you want to be better, Vanessa. That's the whole thing. That's the entire thing right there." A pause. "Go to the school program, sit next to him, watch the kid do her lines, and stop turning everything into a management decision." After she hung up, Vanessa sat for another minute. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work, because the vendor review wasn't going to finish itself and she had a company to run. But the work felt different than it had in a long time. Not lighter exactly, but more real, more grounded in something that had weight beyond the quarterly reports and the board approval and the ongoing project of proving she deserved her father's company. More like the kind of work that was worth doing because you had something worth coming home to at the end of it. Friday evening arrived cold and clear. Jefferson Elementary's winter program was the kind of event that filled the school gymnasium to capacity with parents and grandparents, and the occasional bewildered sibling, rows of folding chairs set up on the gymnasium floor, and a small stage at the front hung with paper snowflakes that the 3rd grade had made, some of them fairly accurate representations, and some of them abstract in ways that suggested the maker had given up on accuracy partway through and committed to art instead. Ethan was already seated when Vanessa arrived, on the aisle in the 4th row, with his coat on the chair beside him in the particular way that meant the coat was saving the seat. He saw her come in and move the coat, and she sat down, and the ordinary logistics of it, the taking off of her coat, the folding of the program, the adjusting of the chair, had a specific normality to it that felt like something that had been practiced, like they had done this before, which they hadn't. "She knows you're here?" Vanessa asked. "I texted her teacher. She knows." He paused. "She's been in the back with her class for 20 minutes. I texted to say I was here, and she texted back, 'I know,' and 3 exclamation points and then nothing, which means she's in performance focus mode." Performance focus mode. She gets quiet before things, concerts, recitals. She goes inward, comes out the other side, and is completely fine. He looked at the program in her hands. "She's in the 3rd segment. The narration runs through the whole thing." Vanessa read the program. 3 segments, a mix of songs and spoken narration, and what appeared to be a theatrical recreation of a winter migration of some kind involving the entire 4th grade. The narrators were listed by name, and Chloe Cole appeared next to 3 line numbers. "She's been practicing since October," Ethan said. 2 of those lines she could deliver in her sleep. "What about the 3rd? There's a word in it, luminescent." He said it with the careful pronunciation of someone who had heard it mispronounced repeatedly at volume. "She keeps hitting the 2nd syllable wrong. She had me quiz her on it every night this week." Vanessa smiled. "Luminescent. I know. That's exactly what she sounds like when she gets it right. Very pleased with herself." The lights in the gymnasium began to dim, which produced a ripple effect of parents shushing each other, and phones being lowered, and children in the front rows going suddenly very rigid with the concentrated excitement of people who were about to be watched. Ethan went quiet beside her. She could see his profile in the dimming light. The same still face, the hands resting on his knees, the forward attention that he gave to things he cared about. He was not a man who performed emotion in public. He sat with it quietly, the way he sat with everything. The program began. The first segment was the 3rd grade's rendition of a song about winter birds, which was earnest and slightly out of tune and completely charming, and the parents in the gymnasium responded to it with the specific warm collective affection that parents reserved for children doing their sincere best. A small boy in the front row forgot the words entirely for the 3rd verse, and compensated by moving his mouth with increasing confidence in the shape of words that were not the words, which Vanessa found inexplicably moving. Then the narrators came out. There were 4 of them, 2 boys and 2 girls, in matching blue scarves that the art teacher had apparently made as props. Chloe was 3rd from the left. She was very straight, chin up, the small concentrated posture of a child who was taking this seriously. Ethan leaned forward slightly. The first narrator delivered the opening lines about winter migration patterns with the crisp cadence of a child who had memorized something thoroughly and was executing the memorization. Applause. The second narrator stepped forward and described the formation patterns of geese. More applause. Then Chloe stepped forward. She looked out at the audience. She found her father's face. Vanessa could see the small adjustment in her expression when she did. The microscopic settling that happened when you spotted the person you were looking for in a crowd. And then, a half beat later, Chloe's eyes moved to the seat beside Ethan. Something crossed her face quickly. A flash of real pleasure, unguarded, the kind children couldn't fake. She looked back at the audience at large and took a breath. "The stars that guide migration," Chloe said, in her clear, practiced voice, "are the same stars every year, but the birds who follow them are never the same birds. They are the children of the birds before them, learning the same path." A pause. The right pause. The one she'd clearly worked on. And somehow, the path remains. Silence in the gymnasium. Then Chloe took another breath, and Vanessa could see the slight lift in her shoulders that meant she was arriving at the 3rd line, the one with the difficult word. "The ocean is dark at its deepest point," Chloe said, "but it is never without light. The creatures there make their own—" the briefest micropause, the internal gathering, luminescent glow. She said it perfectly. Perfectly. Beside Vanessa, Ethan exhaled. It was a very small sound, the kind of sound that only came out when you had been holding something without knowing you were holding it. Vanessa turned to look at him. His jaw was set, and his eyes were bright, and he was looking at the stage with an expression that was so undefended, she felt for a second like she was seeing something she shouldn't. Not because it was private in a bad way, but because it was private in the way that real things were, the kind of love that had no performance in it. She looked back at the stage. Chloe had stepped back into the line of 4, her chin still up, her blue scarf slightly crooked on her shoulder. She was very deliberately not looking at her father's row, which was the practiced restraint of a child who knew that if she looked, she would lose the solemnity of the occasion. The fourth narrator stepped forward. Vanessa found that her own throat was doing something unexpected, and she looked at the paper snowflakes hanging from the gymnasium ceiling until it stopped, which took a moment. After the program, the gymnasium filled with the noise of chairs scraping and children finding parents, and the general warm chaos of a public school event. Chloe came through the side door with the other narrators and found Ethan immediately. He crouched down to her level. She flung both arms around his neck, and he held her for a moment, one hand on the back of her head, and said something too quiet for Vanessa to hear. Chloe pulled back. "I said it right," she said. "You said it perfectly," he told her. "The pause was my idea. Miss Fletcher said I didn't need it, but I thought it made it better." Miss Fletcher was wrong. Chloe looked satisfied. Then she looked at Vanessa, who was standing a few feet back, giving them the space of the moment. "You came," Chloe said. "I came," Vanessa said. "You were wonderful." "I know the pause was right," Chloe said. "Right?" "The pause was absolutely right. It made luminescent land exactly the way it should," Chloe pointed at her. "That's what I said." She looked at her father. "That's what I said." "I agreed with you," Ethan said. "You said Miss Fletcher might have a point." "I said that before I heard you do it." Chloe turned back to Vanessa with the air of someone who had made their case and received the proper verdict. Then she noticed something and reached up to Vanessa's scarf, a dark green wool scarf that Vanessa was wearing, and touched the fringe at the end. "This is nice," Chloe said. "Thank you. It matches your coat." That was intentional. Chloe considered this. "I want to wear matching things, but Dad doesn't always notice when things don't match." "I notice," Ethan said, with injured dignity. "You let me wear the orange shirt with the red pants for 3 weeks before Paula said something. I thought it was a look you were developing." Vanessa pressed her lips together. Chloe caught her expression and grinned. The wide, sudden grin that rearranged her whole face, the one that was her father's. She slipped her hand into Vanessa's with the uncomplicated confidence of a child who had decided something and was acting on it, and Vanessa felt it, the small, warm hand in hers, with a completeness that moved through her chest and settled there. They walked out of the gymnasium together into the December cold, the three of them, into the parking lot, where the lights were up and the parents were making that particular noise that parents made when the event was over, and they were happy and tired, and the sky above Jefferson Elementary was clear and very dark and full of stars that Ethan's daughter had just told a gymnasium full of people were the same ones every year. In the car on the way home, Chloe fell asleep in the back seat inside 15 minutes. Ethan drove. Vanessa sat in the passenger seat of the old Ford pickup, which still smelled like pine from the air freshener and still had the country station playing at low volume, the same truck as the night of the storm, the same quiet. She looked out the window at the Burlington streets going by. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said, after a while. "I wouldn't have missed it," she said. And then, because she was done not saying things that were true, "I mean that." "I know." He drove. She was right about the pause. She was completely right about the pause. He was quiet for a moment. "She likes you," he said. "I like her." Vanessa turned slightly toward him. "I like you." The truck moved through the quiet streets. Chloe's breathing in the back seat was even and deep. The country station played something she didn't know, low and slow. "I know," he said again. And this time the two words carried something different. Not deflection, not acknowledgement at arm's length, but the quiet weight of a man who was saying, "I know," and meaning me too, and meaning I've known for a while, and meaning I didn't know what to do with it either, but here we are, here we are. She turned back to the window. Outside, Burlington moved past them in its winter dark, lit and familiar and cold, and in the back seat Chloe slept with the profound ease of a child who had done the thing she practiced and said the difficult word correctly and had been seen doing it by the people she loved, and the stars through the windshield were the same ones her daughter had described on a gymnasium stage half an hour ago, guiding the children of birds who learned the path from parents who had flown it before them. Vanessa didn't say anything else. Neither did Ethan. Some things were better carried quietly for a little while longer before they were put down and looked at properly. But she was warm, and the truck was moving, and the road ahead was clear. Winter in Burlington did not leave gracefully. It left the way it always did in Vermont, reluctantly, in stages, retreating a few degrees at a time and then coming back overnight to remind you that it hadn't finished yet, that the calendar's opinion about the season was not necessarily its own. February was brown ice and gray slush. March was the same, but with more mud. The river broke up in the second week of March with the low grinding sound that Ethan had learned to listen for from the apartment, the particular crack and shift of ice that had held all winter finally letting go. Chloe said it sounded like the river clearing its throat. He had written that down in the composition book. Not the numbers column this time, a different page, near the back, where he occasionally put things he didn't want to lose. The months between December and April had been the accumulation of ordinary things, the kind of things that didn't announce themselves as significant while they were happening and only became visible in retrospect, when you looked back at the shape of a season and saw what it had built. Vanessa came to Sunday dinners. Not every Sunday. She had a company to run, and weekends were rarely entirely her own, and there were Sundays when a board crisis or a vendor emergency or the particular grinding demands of executive life kept her in her office until 8 at night. But most Sundays, when nothing was on fire, she came. She brought wine she'd clearly thought about, and occasionally bread from the bakery on Maple Street that Chloe had deemed acceptable after a 2-week trial period. She sat on the floor with Chloe and worked on whatever project had Chloe's full attention that week. The ocean map had given way to a solar system model, which had given way to a detailed illustrated timeline of deep-sea exploration that was, Ethan had to admit, genuinely impressive for a third grader. She and Ethan talked. That was the part that had developed with a slowness and a realness that he respected. Not rushed, not performed, not the compressed emotional arc of people who had decided to feel something and were executing the plan. They talked the way people talked when they had time and weren't afraid of the silences in between. About the company, about the operational restructuring he'd been increasingly involved in since Leonard's departure, left gaps that needed filling by people who actually understood the freight floor, about Chloe. About Rebecca, occasionally. Ethan had talked about her more in the past 4 months than he had in the 2 years before that, which he'd noticed without entirely understanding until Paula had said, on a phone call in February, "You sound like yourself again," and he'd sat with that for a while. About Vanessa's father. That had happened on a Sunday in late January, after Chloe was asleep, when Vanessa had been helping him wash dishes, and had been quiet in the specific way she got quiet when something was running behind her eyes that she wasn't sure whether to say. And he'd asked, and she'd told him about Richard Whitmore, not the biography, not the professional legacy, but the man. The way he'd smelled like cedar and coffee, the way he'd called her every Sunday morning until the Sunday he didn't, the way she'd taken over his company and spent 6 years trying to run it the way he would have wanted, which was a thing she'd done so completely that she'd sometimes lost track of what she actually wanted, separate from the inheritance. Ethan had not said anything wise or helpful. He had dried a dish and handed it to her to put away, and said, "He'd have liked the way you handled the Leonard thing." And she had stood holding the dish for a moment and then put it in the cabinet and said quietly, "I hope so." And that had been enough, the way the right things often were. Paula came down from Montpelier in February for a weekend, ostensibly to see Ethan and Chloe, but actually, as Ethan understood perfectly well, to evaluate Vanessa. Paula evaluated people the way she did most things, directly, with complete transparency about the fact that she was doing it, which was somehow both more uncomfortable and more honest than the covert version. She had shaken Vanessa's hand at the door and said, "So you're the one who fired my brother," which Ethan had heard from the kitchen and had closed his eyes briefly about. "I am," Vanessa had said. "I was wrong to do it the way I did it." "You were wrong to do it at all." "Paula," Ethan said from the kitchen doorway. "She agrees with me," Paula said. "Don't you?" A brief pause. "Yes," Vanessa said. Paula had looked at her for a long moment with the assessing focus that Ethan had grown up on the receiving end of, and knew was not hostile but was not comfortable either. Then she'd nodded once and said, "Come in. I'm making Ethan's chili recipe because he never makes it spicy enough." By the end of the weekend, Vanessa and Paula had had 2 long conversations that Ethan had not been present for, which he took as a positive sign, because Paula only invested conversational time in people she found worth talking to. On Sunday morning before Paula drove back to Montpelier, she had found Ethan in the kitchen alone and stood beside him at the counter with her coffee and said nothing for a while, which with Paula meant she was about to say something important. "She's good for you," Paula said finally. "It's complicated," he said, which was his reflexive answer, and which Paula dismissed with the same expression she'd been dismissing it with since December. "It's not," she said. "You've been alone for 3 years, and you've been doing it well, which is its own kind of problem, because you're good enough at surviving alone that you can keep doing it indefinitely. And Chloe is good enough at adapting that she'd let you." She turned to look at him. "But you don't have to, that's all I'm saying." He had nodded. He had not said anything, because the thing Paula was describing was something he already knew, had known since December, probably since the farmer's market, possibly since the night of the storm. And the knowing wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the particular vulnerability of wanting something after you had learned, very thoroughly, that the things you wanted could be taken without warning. Rebecca would have liked her, Paula said, which was the last thing he'd expected her to say, and the thing that settled something he hadn't known was still unsettled. He looked at his coffee. "Yeah," he said. "She would have, Paula patted his arm once, in the practical way she showed most things, and went to say goodbye to Chloe. April arrived the way it always did eventually, tentatively at first, then with sudden, almost aggressive warmth that Vermonters met with the cautious disbelief of people who had been fooled before. The mud season gave way to actual ground. Things that had been dormant began performing their slow, reliable return. The forsythia first, then the crocuses along the sidewalk outside the apartment building that Chloe monitored daily with the dedication of a scientist tracking an experiment. 2 more, she reported to Ethan on a Tuesday morning in early April, before school, crouching at the edge of the small garden bed with her backpack on. "The purple ones are coming up faster than the yellow." "That's because you've been talking to them," Ethan said. "That actually works," Chloe said, with the certainty of a child who had read about it. "Plants respond to sound vibration. It's science." "I stand corrected." She stood up, satisfied, and they got in the truck. It was a different season from the one the story had started in, and both of them felt it differently than they had in previous years. Ethan couldn't have said exactly when the shift happened. The slow reorientation from a life organized around managing loss toward something that was beginning, hesitantly and without announcement, to feel like more than management. It wasn't one moment. It was the accumulated weight of months of ordinary things. Sunday dinners and floor walks and late texts and a child doing her homework at the kitchen table while 2 adults sat across from each other with the quiet ease of people who didn't need to fill every silence. The maple tree was Chloe's idea. She had seen them in the backyard of a house 3 blocks over, a big old silver maple that had gone spectacular red in the fall. And she had fixated on it with the specific intensity she brought to things she'd decided were important. She wanted one. Not a big one, she understood, after Ethan explained it, that the full-size maples in Vermont were older than most buildings in Burlington, but a young one. A starter one. "A tree we grow with," she said at dinner in March, as though this completed an explanation. "Where would we put it?" Ethan asked, practically. "The backyard." Their building had a small shared backyard, mostly concrete, with a narrow strip of actual soil along the back fence, where 2 previous tenants had made halting efforts at a garden and given up. The building's owner, a retired carpenter named Howard, who lived on the ground floor and maintained everything with the personal investment of someone who thought of the building as his extended home, had given a standing general permission for backyard projects provided you didn't wreck anything. "We'd have to ask Howard," Ethan said. "Howard likes me," Chloe said. Howard did in fact like Chloe enormously. She had spent the previous summer sitting on his back porch asking him questions about wood joinery that he had answered with increasing delight. "I'll ask Howard," Ethan said. Howard had said yes before Ethan finished the question, so on a Saturday morning in mid-April, they had a young maple sapling in a 5-gallon container sourced from a nursery in Shelburne, and a plan that Chloe had drawn out in her notebook in detail that included the depth of the hole, the spacing from the fence, and a note that said water every 2 days. Science. Ethan had asked Vanessa without ceremony, in a Wednesday text. "Chloe's planting her tree Saturday. You should come." And Vanessa had said yes the same way she said yes to things these days, without deliberation, as if the answer were already known and the text was just the logistics. She arrived at 9 in the morning with coffee from the place on Pine Street that Ethan had mentioned once and she had remembered, and with a pair of gardening gloves she'd bought specifically because she'd thought about it and decided she wanted them, which was a small thing, and also not a small thing. She showed up at the back door of the apartment building in jeans and a worn flannel shirt that was not what she typically wore to anything, and which she had put on with specific intention, because some occasions required you to dress for what you were actually doing. Chloe was already in the backyard with her notebook open, marking the spot she'd chosen with a stick and a length of string and a geometry that she had explained to Howard, who was sitting in his porch chair with his coffee, watching the proceedings with the benevolent attention of someone who was very happy with how his Saturday was going. "You have gloves," Chloe said, approvingly, when she saw Vanessa. "I thought I might need them." "You will. The soil is clay under the top layer. It sticks to everything." She showed Vanessa her own hands, which already had soil under the nails, as evidence. Ethan came out of the building with the spade and the sapling in its container, and he looked at Vanessa standing in his building's backyard in a flannel shirt with gardening gloves and a coffee cup, and he felt something move through him that was past warmth and hadn't had a name for a while, and now was beginning to. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she said. Chloe directed the digging. This was non-negotiable. She had the notebook, she had the string-marked location, and she had specific opinions about depth and angle that she communicated with the patient authority of a project manager who had done the research and expected the crew to execute accordingly. Ethan dug. Vanessa helped with the loosening and turning of the clay layer, which was, as promised, stubborn and heavy, and stuck to the gloves in satisfying chunks. Howard watched from his porch and occasionally offered commentary that was mostly agreeable, and once corrected Chloe's depth estimate, which Chloe received with a scrutinizing look at her notebook before conceding he was right. The hole took 40 minutes. When it was right, Chloe measured it twice with a ruler she'd brought from the apartment. Ethan lifted the sapling from its container. It was small, maybe 3 feet tall, with the fragile new season green of leaves that had only just arrived, each one still slightly unfurled, not fully committed to being a leaf yet. The root ball was solid, though, which the nursery had told him meant the tree was healthy, well established before it was moved. "Who puts it in?" Vanessa asked. "All three," Chloe said immediately. So they did. Ethan lowered the root ball into the hole and held the trunk straight while Chloe and Vanessa pressed soil in around the roots, working from opposite sides. Chloe narrating the process from her notebook and occasionally using her whole forearm to press down the clay layer, and Vanessa following her lead with the careful adaptability of a person who had gotten good, over the past few months, at following Chloe's lead. When the soil was in and pressed and level, Chloe checked the level with a small tool she'd borrowed from Howard. Ethan let go of the trunk. The sapling stood on its own. It leaned a few degrees to the east, which Chloe noted and which Ethan said was fine, that trees self-corrected as they grew, and besides there was more light on that side. Chloe accepted this but wrote a note in her notebook that said, "Monitor lean, monthly." Howard came down from his porch for the first time all morning, moving carefully on the stairs, and stood looking at the sapling with his coffee cup and the expression of a man who had planted a few trees in his time and knew what he was looking at. "Good location," he said. "Gets afternoon sun in summer and the fence breaks the north wind. It'll do well there." "I know," Chloe said. Howard looked at Ethan with the small, private smile of an older man who found children funny and didn't try to hide it. "She's something," he said. "I know," Ethan said. They watered the tree from the garden hose, Chloe controlling the flow with fierce concentration to avoid displacing the newly settled soil. And then they stood back and looked at it. Small, slightly east-leaning, 3 feet of young maple in a strip of Vermont soil against a wooden fence on an April morning. "It needs a name," Chloe announced. "Trees don't usually have names," Ethan said. "This one does." She looked at it with her head slightly to one side. "I'm going to think about it." "Take your time," Vanessa said. Chloe looked at her. "You can help name it, if you want." "I'd be honored." Chloe nodded, satisfied with this arrangement, and went inside to wash her hands, her notebook tucked under her arm, already writing something as she walked. Howard followed her in, patting Ethan on the shoulder as he passed. "Good kid," he said simply. "Good tree." And then it was just Ethan and Vanessa in the backyard, standing in the April sun beside the young maple, with soil on both their hands and the morning quiet settling back over the space. He looked at the tree. She looked at him. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. I owe you something that isn't paperwork or back pay or a formal restructuring of your job classification." He turned to look at her. She was looking at the tree, not at him, which he understood. Some things were easier to say when you were looking at something else. She had taken her gardening gloves off and was holding them in one hand, and her coffee cup had been set on the fence post, and the morning light was doing what April light did. The the specific quality of it that had no equivalent in any other season, the particular new warmth that Vermont earned after the months it went through to get there. I made a decision about you, she said, without knowing you. I reduced you to a column of numbers, and I acted on information I didn't verify because it was convenient and because I had other things to think about and because... She stopped. Because I had spent 6 years building walls between myself and the possibility that I might be wrong, because being wrong, in that building, cost me credibility I'd bled to earn. She turned to look at him now. And you paid for my walls. You and Chloe paid for them. But Vanessa, let me finish. Not sharp, just clear. I know you've said it's done. I know you've been more generous about it than I deserved. But I want to say it properly, once, without it being a business transaction, not a reinstatement contract, not a HR settlement. She held his gaze. I'm sorry for what I did to you, to both of you. And I am... She paused. I'm aware that you didn't have to be kind to me. On the highway, after, any of it. And the fact that you were, despite everything, that's not something I take for granted. That's not something I'm ever going to take for granted. He looked at her for a long moment. The thing about Vanessa Whitmore, the thing he had been learning, slowly, month by month, in the accumulation of Sunday dinners and floor walks and late-night conversations and mornings in a school gymnasium, was that she was harder than she looked and more fragile than she admitted, and that the combination of those two things had been armoring her against the world for so long that she had forgotten she was wearing it. The past months had been the slow process of her taking it off, which she did badly and inconsistently and with enormous difficulty, and which he had watched with the patience of a man who understood that kind of process from the inside. She had said it properly. He could hear the difference. I know, he said. That's what you always say. Because I do. It doesn't make you angry, even a little? He thought about it honestly. It made me angry in October, he said, sitting at that kitchen table doing the math, wondering what to tell Chloe. That was angry. He looked at the tree. But I've seen who you are when the armor is off. I've seen you on the floor with paint on your hands and a kid directing you like a construction foreman. I've seen you sit in a school gymnasium and cry at 3 lines of narration. I wasn't... You were a little. A pause. A little, she allowed. I'm not angry anymore, he said. I haven't been for a while. He turned to face her fully. I want to be clear about something, though. She held his gaze. This, he gestured between them, the small backyard, the young maple, the building, all of it. This isn't me being generous. It's not me being the bigger person or letting it go or any of those things. I'm here because I want to be here, because you're someone I want in my life. He paused. And because Chloe would make my life very difficult if I let you leave. The corner of Vanessa's mouth moved. That's romantic. I'm a practical man. You're a man who changed a stranger's tire in a blizzard because he couldn't leave someone on the side of the road. That's practical too. Ethan. Her voice was quiet. You could have left. You should have, arguably. You didn't, and not just with the tire. Every time I gave you a reason to close the door. She looked at him with an expression that he had seen building over months, and that was now fully there, unguarded, the real face of her. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because some people are worth the inconvenience, he said. And you knew it the second I said no in that car, when you tried to give back the jacket. You could have made it transactional. You didn't. He looked at her. And because Chloe looked at you at the farmer's market, like you were someone she'd been waiting to meet. And Chloe's instincts are better than mine. Vanessa looked at the tree again. I want to be good at this, she said. I'm not practiced at it. I'm better at running a company than I am at, she gestured, this. I know. I'll get it wrong sometimes. So will I. I got a daughter's entire livelihood wrong because I was too busy to ask one question. You fixed it. He stepped toward her, closing the distance that they'd been managing carefully for months. The particular distance of 2 people who know something is true and have been carrying it at arm's length until the moment is right. You drove to the apartment. You sat on the floor. You came to the school program. You showed up. He stopped in front of her. That's what fixing looks like. She looked up at him. This close, he could see what the past months had done to her. Not aged her exactly, but changed her, the way the armor coming off changed a person's face, softened the lines around the eyes. Let something younger and less certain show through, which was better, more real. The tree needs a name, she said softly. It does. I was thinking. She stopped, reconsidered. Chloe should name it. It's her project. She'll probably name it something from the ocean, he said. Prepare yourself. I can live with a marine biology tree name. He laughed. It was the full version, unexpected, and she felt it the way she always felt it, the rarity of it making it land harder than it should. She smiled and reached up and touched the front of his jacket with 2 fingers, just briefly, the lightest possible contact, and he took her hand and held it, and they stood like that for a moment in the April backyard beside the small east-leaning maple tree in the strip of Vermont soil. Nothing more than that. Not yet. Some things were still in the process of arriving, and neither of them was in a hurry, and the morning was long. Chloe named the tree Nautilus. She announced it at dinner that evening with the finality of someone who had spent the afternoon in deliberation and arrived at the right answer. She had looked it up. A nautilus was a deep-sea creature, she explained, an ancient one of the oldest surviving species on Earth, that used the same shell its entire life and just kept adding chambers to it as it grew. The shell expanded, but it was always the same shell. So the tree keeps growing, she said, but it's always the same tree. Ethan looked at his daughter. He thought about the composition book on the shelf, the crossed-out numbers on one page and the notes near the back on another, Chloe's river clearing its throat, and a few other things he'd written down because he wanted to keep them. He thought about Rebecca's photo on the nightstand, which was still there and would always be there, and the drawings on the refrigerator that now included a 4th figure alongside the father and the small girl and the brown-haired woman, a new figure, dark-haired, not always perfectly drawn, sometimes too tall and sometimes too small, but present. Consistently present. That's a good name, Vanessa said. I know, Chloe said. After dinner, while Chloe finished her homework at the kitchen table, Ethan and Vanessa washed dishes side by side the way they did on Sundays, in the small kitchen that was more comfortable with 2 people in it than it had any architectural right to be. The apartment was warm. The light was the good evening kind, low and yellow. She's going to grow up knowing this story, Vanessa said quietly, handing him a bowl to dry. Whatever it becomes, she's going to grow up with it. Yeah, he dried the bowl. I think about that. Does it scare you? He thought about it honestly. A little. Not the same way it used to. He put the bowl in the cabinet. 3 years ago, the idea of bringing anyone into what we were, what Chloe and I were, felt like too much risk. Not because of Chloe specifically. Because I was still figuring out how to carry it myself, and I didn't trust myself to do it without dropping something. And now, he handed her the next dish. Now I've had 3 years of practice. He looked at her sideways, and now the person in question has seen the apartment and the truck and the cold coffee and the badly braided hair and somehow keeps showing up anyway. The truck has grown on me, she said. You hate the country station. I have said nothing about the country station. You make a face. She paused. I make a face. Every time. It's a very specific genre. It's a good genre. We have different opinions on this. We do, he agreed, and there was something easy in it, the way there was something easy in all their small disagreements now. The warmth of 2 people who had found the places where they didn't fit and decided those places didn't matter much. From the table, without looking up from her homework. Are you guys arguing about the music again? No, they said at the same time. Chloe looked up with the expression of a child who did not believe this but chose not to pursue it. She went back to her homework. She turned a page. She mouthed the words slightly, the way she always did. Ethan watched her and felt the particular love that was not like any other kind, the one that made you want to hold the moment without squeezing it too hard, because the holding too hard was what broke things. And he had learned that, and the learning had cost him, and on the other side of the cost was this. A kitchen, a Wednesday evening in April, his daughter doing homework, the sound of the river somewhere outside through the open window. Because it was finally warm enough to have a window open, the first time since October. He passed the last dish to Vanessa, and she dried her hands and turned to lean against the counter the way she did. The particular way she leaned when she was settled, when the executive posture had fully given way to just being a person in a kitchen. And he turned too, and they stood side by side looking at Chloe at the table. I have a question, Vanessa said. Okay. A serious one. He looked at her. "Do you trust me?" she asked. He thought about what the question actually meant. Not whether he trusted her with the secret or with the company freight data or with any of the small practical things, but whether he trusted her with the things that had weight. With Chloe's ordinary mornings and the composition book and the photo on the nightstand, and the whole imperfect accumulated structure of a life that had already survived a great deal. "Yes," he said. "I'm going to get things wrong," she said. "I get things wrong even when I'm trying not to. I miss things. I make decisions too fast. I have years of armor to take off, and I won't do it cleanly. I know. I just want you to know I'm aware of it. Vanessa." He turned to look at her properly. "I watched you sit on a gymnasium floor and hold a child's hand and cry at 3 lines of narration about navigation. I'm not under any illusions about perfection." He paused. "I was a widower with PTSD symptoms I never fully addressed, and a kid who wouldn't let go of my hand at school breakfast. I'm also not offering perfect." She looked at him with the particular expression she had when something hit close, the one she didn't try to manage anymore, that she'd stopped trying to manage somewhere around February when managing it had started to feel like too much work. "Good," she said. "Perfect sounds exhausting." "It does," he agreed. "Okay. Okay," he said. From the table, "Okay what?" "Nothing, Chloe." "You keep saying okay to each other. That means something happened." "We're having an adult conversation. You're in the kitchen." Adults have conversations in kitchens. Chloe looked at them for a long moment with the focused assessment of a child who had very good instincts and was exercising them. Then she looked at Vanessa. Then she looked at her father. Then she looked back at her homework. "The tree's going to need more water this week," she said. "The forecast shows no rain until Friday." "I'll water it tomorrow," Ethan said. "We could all do it," Chloe said. She said it casually, like it was a logistical point rather than what it was. "In the morning, before school. It only takes a few minutes." Ethan looked at Vanessa. Vanessa looked at him. "I can be here by 7:30, she said. Chloe did not look up from her homework. But the small satisfied nod she gave, the barely visible tipping of her head, the closing of a negotiation she'd been patient about, was unmistakable to her father, who had been watching her face for 8 years and knew every version of it. He turned back to the window. Outside, the street was the April version of itself. Still some mud at the edges, but green pushing through where the snow had finally given up. The river was running freely now, clear of ice for the first time since November. Things that had waited were beginning. He thought about the stars Chloe had described in the school gymnasium. The same stars every year, and the birds who followed them never the same birds, children learning the path from parents who had flown it before. He thought about the nautilus in its shell, growing new chambers without leaving the old ones behind, carrying everything it had ever been into the new space. I was 32 years old. He had deployed overseas 3 times and come home all 3. He had loved someone completely and lost her and learned to carry the loss without being defined by it, which was the hardest thing he had done and also the thing he was most certain about, that you could carry something like that and still be open, that the carrying and the opening were not opposites. He had a daughter who named trees after ancient sea creatures and monitored crocuses like a scientist and mouthed the words when she read and had given him large hands in every drawing she'd ever made of him, because she'd decided early that his hands were for holding things. And he had, on an April morning in a small backyard, pressed soil around the roots of a young maple tree, with a woman who had fired him in a glass office in November and changed, gradually, imperfectly, genuinely, into someone he wanted beside him at a kitchen sink. Not a clean story, not a simple one. The kind of story that had corners and costs and things that didn't resolve neatly, because those were the only real stories, the ones where the people involved had made actual mistakes and done actual work, and were still, at the end of it, standing close enough to share the weight. He didn't have a name for what it was yet. He thought that was probably fine. The maple tree grew, slowly, the way trees did, not the visible, dramatic growth of things that moved fast and died early, but the steady, patient kind, adding a little height each month, each new set of leaves slightly higher than the last, the trunk thickening by millimeters that you couldn't see in a day but could measure in a season. By summer, it had cleared 4 feet. Chloe marked it on the fence post with a pencil line and the date, and made Howard come out and verify the measurement, and recorded it in the notebook alongside the lean observation, East Lean Stable, acceptable per Ethan and Howard. and the watering log and a pressed leaf from the first full set of summer growth, taped to the page with the care she brought to things she wanted to keep. On a warm evening in late June, the three of them had dinner in the backyard for the first time. Ethan carried the table out, and Vanessa carried the chairs, and Chloe carried the plates one at a time with concentration, 3 trips, refusing help with the dignity of someone managing an important task. Howard sat on his porch and declined the invitation to join them on the grounds that he had a specific chair and a specific view and was not interested in deviating from either. But he accepted the plate Chloe brought him without being asked, which she had anticipated. They ate in the long June evening light, the kind that lasted until 9 and made everything look unhurried. The maple tree threw a small shadow that reached almost to the table by the time they were done eating. Chloe fell asleep in her chair before dessert, which happened sometimes when the day had been full enough, and Ethan carried her inside without waking her and came back and sat down, and it was just the two of them, and the table, and the tree, and the long light. Vanessa poured the last of the wine. "She's getting taller," she said. "She's going to be taller than me by the time she's 12, Ethan said. "I've accepted this. She'll deny it to protect your feelings. She absolutely will." He smiled. "That's the thing about her. She's completely honest, except when she thinks the honest thing will hurt someone, and then she finds a way around it that's technically true. She gets that from somewhere." He looked at her. She was looking at the tree. "You know what I've been thinking about lately," she said. "Something you said in October in the HR meeting." She turned to look at him. "You said you didn't explain yourself to people who'd already made up their minds, because it became begging. And you didn't do that." She paused. "I've thought about that a lot." "In what way?" "Because I've done that. Made up my mind before I had the full picture. Not just with you, with people in general, with the board, with vendors, with—" She looked at her glass. "I moved so fast for so long that I turned the speed itself into a virtue. Efficient, decisive. And those things are real, they're useful, but speed is also how you miss things." She looked at him. "How you miss people." "You're not doing that anymore," he said. "I'm trying not to." She held his gaze. "I look at you sometimes, the way you move, the way you listen to people, and I think about all the things I would have missed if I'd kept going the way I was going. If that storm hadn't happened." She paused. "If you hadn't stopped." "You would have figured something out," he said. "You're resourceful. I would have been cold and alone on a highway and eventually gotten home and gone to sleep and gone back to the same office the next morning and never known." She said it plainly, without performance. "That's the part I think about." He was quiet for a moment. "I think about the school breakfast," he said. "Chloe holding my hand. That's what made me late. That's the whole chain of it." He looked at the tree. "She needed 10 more minutes and I gave them to her, that's all it was. And everything else follows from that." Vanessa was quiet. "There's no lesson in that," he said. "It's not that kindness gets rewarded or that good things come to people who deserve them. It's just sometimes the shape of things comes from the smallest choices. Chloe holding my hand. Me stopping on the highway because I couldn't not." He paused. "You driving to the apartment instead of sending Carol." "I wanted to," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "That's the thing, isn't it? You didn't have to want to, but you did." The evening was warm and still. Somewhere past the fence, the city went on in its summer way. Traffic, voices, the distant sound of someone's music. The river was warm now, running clean and fast, nothing like the broken ice of March. Vanessa reached across the table and put her hand over his. Not a dramatic gesture. A simple one, the kind that said, "I'm here," in the most direct possible language. And he turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat that way in the June light, while the maple tree grew its patient millimeters in the soil Chloe had measured twice, and they had all pressed together on an April morning when the frost was barely out of the ground. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't supposed to be. It was a woman who moved too fast, learning to slow down, and a man who had survived too much learning to stay open, and a child who had decided both things were worth keeping and had arranged events accordingly, with the quiet strategic genius of someone 8 years old who understood the important things. It was a tree with an east lean and a Nautilus name and a pencil mark on a fence post that would need to move up by summer's end. It was this particular evening, with the light going soft and the food eaten and the wine nearly gone, and Howard on his porch, and Chloe asleep inside and the two of them outside in the easy quiet that was the best kind. The kind you didn't have to fill. It was enough. More than enough. It was the whole thing.